Hey guys, today I'll show you a science fiction horror TV series named Fringe, Season 1. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The first episode takes place on a commercial flight traveling from Hamburg to Boston. A nervous man retrieves a syringe from his bag. He injects what appears to be insulin into his abdomen. Moments later, his entire body shockingly begins to liquefy. This phenomenon quickly spreads throughout the cabin, and the bodies of all the passengers and crew members start melting and disintegrating. The scene shifts to a FBI agent named Olivia, who is currently in a motel in an intimate moment with her colleague and boyfriend, John. Upon receiving a call from her boss, she rushes to the airport to investigate the incident. Soon, John also receives a call from his superior. Their colleague, Charlie, briefs Olivia about the case. The flight had 147 passengers, and contact was lost with the control tower 3 hours after takeoff. The wireless communication system remained unanswered. As a response, the U.S. military dispatched 2 jets to escort. The pilots reported bloodstains on the plane's windows and no signs of life on board. John also rushes to the airport, greeting Olivia nonchalantly. Indeed, their office romance is a well-kept secret. Investigators, donning Level 4 protective suits, enter the cabin. The scene inside is horrifying beyond belief. The passengers have been turned into skeletons, enveloped in a sticky substance. The next day, in the federal building in Boston, the investigators are busily cross-checking the passengers' information. It's then that Charlie mentions a call received by the Back Bay police station at 3 a.m. from a warehouse security guard. He had seen 2 suspicious-looking Middle Eastern men handing a suitcase to a white man. The head officer, Philip, dispatches Olivia to investigate immediately. John accompanies her to the warehouse district in Back Bay. He pries open the doors to several warehouses. One of them stands out as suspicious, housing numerous instruments and vessels containing animals. It's clearly a laboratory. John urges Olivia to contact the chemical transport team for backup, but there's no signal inside the warehouse. Olivia has to run outside to an open area to make the call. Suddenly, the door to the warehouse opposite swings open. A man, upon seeing John, breaks into a run. The 2 engage in a cat-and-mouse chase in the snow. John hastily dials Olivia for backup. Olivia sees the man abruptly stop and tap something into his phone. Realizing something is wrong, she screams in panic, but it's too late. The warehouse suddenly explodes, and Olivia's heavy body is thrown into a shipping container by the shockwave. When she woke up again, she found herself in a hospital. She was fortunate to only have minor scrapes. However, John had been contaminated by a synthetic compound in the explosion. The situation was dire. His skin had turned semi-transparent, and he was on the verge of death. Olivia couldn't help but shed tears, yet she was not willing to give up. She worked diligently in her office, searching for any way to save her secret boyfriend. At last, she discovered information about the eccentric scientist Dr. Walter. She approached Philip and requested permission to contact Dr. Walter. Philip said that Dr. Walter has been living in a mental hospital for 17 years, forbidden from visiting anyone other than his direct relatives. With this, Olivia flew to Iraq to find Dr. Walter's only son, Peter. The records indicated that Peter had dropped out of high school, yet his IQ was as high as 190. He was a loner with a criminal record and had always had a distant relationship with his father. At that moment, Peter was in Iraq discussing a collaboration with someone. Olivia, falsely claiming to have some dirt on him, pressured him into returning with her to see Dr. Walter. Upon arriving at the mental hospital, Olivia met the eccentric and illogical Dr. Walter for the first time. But it was clear that Dr. Walter understood John's condition and even said John could be restored. Olivia quickly grasped this lifeline. Under her threats and inducements, Peter reluctantly signed his father's discharge papers. The group returned to Boston and headed straight for the hospital. John was still unconscious. His skin had started to harden and become transparent, revealing the muscles and bones beneath. After several reminders, Dr. Walter turned his attention to John. He used a scalpel to scrape off a small piece of John's transparent skin, placing it in a petri dish to take back to his lab. However, the lab had been sealed off more than a decade ago when he was arrested. Upon hearing this, Dr. Walter became agitated and flew into a hysterical rage. Olivia had no choice but to appeal to her superior to reopen Dr. Walter's lab in the basement of Harvard University. Returning to his long-abandoned lab, Dr. Walter was filled with emotion. motion. He listed the resources he needed for his experiments, which surprisingly included a 2-year-old purebred cow. Peter explained to a puzzled Olivia that genetically speaking, humans and cows share a majority of their genes. Thus, the adorable cow was brought into Dr. Walter's lab. The doctor then began his experiments. It was only then that Peter realized that Olivia did not actually have any dirt on him. She had simply used that ruse to get his help urgently. In the evening, Dr. Walter concluded that the airplane incident might have originated from a project the Department of Defense used against the Viet Cong during the Vietnam War in 1972. The chemical reaction of the raw materials in the lab resulted in John's infection. If they could find the product catalog in the warehouse, they could synthesize an antidote to save John. Olivia was filled with despair because everything in the warehouse had been burnt to ashes. Moreover, only John had seen the suspect's face. Dr. Walter suggested using a synapse transmission system to share dreams. He continued to explain that the human brain generates a certain amount of electrical field, allowing two people to share information when they lose consciousness. The doctor had used this method to extract information from a body 6 hours after its death. However, this experiment also had significant risks. They would need to insert a magnetic probe into Olivia's skull, immerse her body in salt water, and inject her with a large amount of drugs. Peter advised her not to try his lunatic father's methods, but Olivia was willing to take the risk to save her boyfriend. So they brought John to the lab. Once everything was ready, Olivia took a life-threatening gamble and lay in a pool filled with salt water. Gradually, her brain waves began to sync with John's. Olivia entered John's dream world, and the two lovers met again in their dreams. Olivia saw the suspect's face in John's memory. Afterward, everyone hurriedly pulled Olivia out of the pool. Olivia rushed back to the office and sketched the suspect's face on the computer. Among the photos of the plane crash victims, one person looked identical to the suspect. Her colleague quickly found the passenger's twin brother, Richard, who had ties to the company called Massive Dynamics. Soon, Olivia arrived at the company and explained her purpose. The executive director, Nina, ordered her staff to prepare all the information related to Richard. She informed Olivia that Richard had worked in the weapons research lab and had been arrested and subsequently fired 3 months ago for allegedly taking secret documents out of the lab. After handing over the information, she casually asked Olivia if she really thought this person could be part of the plan. Olivia was confused by the question. At this point, Nina realized she had spoken too much. Olivia was unaware of what she was referring to. Before saying goodbye, Nina reminded Olivia to be careful of her situation. Olivia and Peter, after much effort and struggle, finally managed to capture the suspect together. However, Richard refused to speak. Peter took advantage of Olivia's absence to interrogate Richard, using his professional knowledge and force to extract the name of the chemical drug. Peter suggested using John's spare blood to make an antidote, and then to administer the antidote intravenously. Peter's father approved of this brilliant plan. At this time, Philip sought out Olivia. He revealed the incident on the flight was the latest in a series of inexplicable paranormal events that have been occurring across the planet in recent months. It's known as the pattern, and he theorized that it was a series of experiments in which innocent people were being used as guinea pigs. He then expressed admiration for Olivia's exceptional work ability and invited her to join his paranormal events investigation team called the Fringe. However, the confused Olivia adamantly refused. John's skin was gradually healing, and he was regaining consciousness. He was then transferred to the hospital for further recovery. Olivia visited Richard in the hospital, asking him why he killed his own twin brother and who he sold the research results to. He maintained that he hadn't sold it to anyone, but was coerced by her colleague. He said he had recorded the conversation at the time and buried the tape. Olivia found the tape buried near his house, and to her surprise, the voice on the tape belonged to her boyfriend, John. Olivia recalled that on the day of the Flight 627 incident, she had heard John say the same words during a phone call with someone else. She requested additional security outside John's hospital room and protection for Richard, but it was a step too late. John had already suffocated Richard with a pillow and was preparing to flee the hospital. When Olivia returned to the hospital, she saw her boyfriend preparing to escape. She chased after him, and after a series of car chases, John crashed and was fatally injured. With his dying breath, he weakly told Olivia to think carefully why Philip sent her to investigate the warehouse. Olivia demanded to know who John was working for, but he had already taken his last breath. Olivia broke down in tears, completely lost. After a long while, she wiped her tears and rushed back to the lab, where she found Dr. Walter and his son preparing to leave. Olivia tried to persuade them to stay and work for her. Peter told her that his father told him about the terrifying experiments he had conducted together with another doctor named Bell. The incident on the plane was just the beginning, so he was even more eager to leave this dreadful place. But when Olivia looked at him with pleading eyes, Peter relented. Meanwhile, John's body was sent to Massive Dynamics' lab. Nina ordered the staff to begin the interrogation. The second episode takes place at a motel in Boston where a young couple had just shared a smelly moment and were casually chatting. Suddenly, the woman screams like a chicken and collapses to the floor. Her flat stomach suddenly swells. The piercing cries for help draw the attention of nearby residents who come out to assist. The man rushes her to the hospital, dropping her off at the entrance before promptly leaving. The medical staff place the woman on a stretcher and inquire about her condition. Confused, she stammers that she didn't even know she was pregnant for months. However, she quickly loses consciousness and her heartbeat stops. The doctors perform a cesarean section to save the baby, only to be horrified by what they retrieve. The sight of the newborn sends the doctors into shock and they start screaming in a chicken voice. Following this, the head officer Philip urgently convenes a meeting with his team, announcing the formation of a new unit composed of Dr. Walter, Peter, and Olivia. They arrive at the hospital quickly. Philip briefs them on the case. The woman gave birth less than 2 minutes after being declared dead. The newborn was convulsing and screaming, then aged rapidly and died within half an hour. They then witnessed the horrifying sight of the giant newborn's death. However, Dr. Walter seems to have a hunch about what's going on. To further investigate, they bring the body to the lab. Meanwhile, the assistant receives a call from the hospital. It's from a guest at the motel who called to ask about the pregnant woman. So Olivia and Peter follow the lead to the motel to look for clues. Peter finds a drop of orange gel-like substance near the pool, and Olivia discovers a changed bedsheet in the closet. She seems agitated, believing it was the modus operandi of the killer she had been after. She explains that she and John were investigating a serial killer case known as the brain surgeon. Despite their efforts, they never caught the killer. It was the first case she took on after joining the Fringe division, which was tasked with investigating the pattern and its cause. In that period, 5 young women were murdered every few days. The killer would take the selected girls to a motel, inject them with a muscle relaxant, make a cut in their gum line, tear from the mouth to the eyes, and penetrate into the nasal cavity to extract part of the brain. However, Peter doesn't understand the connection between that and the current case. Olivia can't explain it clearly either, but her intuition tells her that the two cases are linked. Moreover, the orange gel-like substance is the muscle relaxant used by the killer. Olivia says if this is the sample, she can guarantee that he is the criminal they're looking for, and he will strike again. Following this, she asks her colleague Charlie to help her retrieve the files related to the brain surgeon case from 12 years ago. Dr. Walter has made some new progress. The test results on the giant baby are the same as an experiment he conducted 30 years ago. However, he can't recall the specific details of that experiment, but he finally remembered where he parked his car. His son Peter accompanied him to the garage where the doctor's car has been parked for a shocking 17 years. The car was filled with the old man's most treasured possessions. Peter drove the car back to Harvard University, and everyone together moved Dr. Walter's precious experimental archives back to the lab. When Dr. Walter mentioned the pituitary gland, Olivia thought of the perpetrator in the neurologist case. It was indeed through performing surgery on the victims and removing their pituitary glands. Dr. Walter continued to explain that the pituitary gland governs the aging of the body. Therefore, by manipulating the pituitary gland, all growth hormones in the human body can be controlled. Olivia mentioned the name of Professor Claus. Dr. Walter also recalled him, saying he was a former colleague of his, and they once conducted experiments on rapid aging together. The professor might be able to help them catch the perpetrator. After listening, Olivia called Charlie again, asking him to help look for recent victims who had their pituitary glands removed. Then she and Peter went to Boston University to visit Professor Claus. However, the professor seemed to be perfunctory, saying that his research only works in theory and that he never achieved experimental success. Moreover, he resigned from this government agency long ago and no longer conducts relevant research. At this point, Charlie had some news. The police found a blonde female victim. She had a surgical incision at her upper gum line and her central endocrine gland had been removed. Soon, the deceased was sent to Dr. Walter's lab. This reminded Dr. Walter of a soldier breeding research project he had conducted years ago for the Department of Defense. They could make a fertilized egg grow rapidly in just 3 years, just like a 21-year-old adult male. This method could quickly cultivate soldiers, but the only problem was that they could not delay the aging process. The soldiers would age rapidly. He believed that someone had made a breakthrough, and this perpetrator might be a test subject because they would age rapidly. To delay aging, he must constantly extract pituitary hormones from the victims to keep himself youthful. Olivia still didn't quite understand how this tied in with the pregnant woman in the hospital. Peter explained that it was an exception. The perpetrator passed his traits to the baby. He originally intended to kill the woman that night and extract her pituitary hormones, but they had relations first, which resulted in her pregnancy. The intensifying pain from the pregnancy attracted the neighbors' attention, so the perpetrator didn't kill her at the motel. At this moment, Dr. Walter thought of a method. Since the female victim in the lab had been administered a muscle relaxant, the drug would freeze her neural pathways at the moment of her death and capture the last image she saw before she died. This image could be transferred to a monitor via a laser optical instrument. Thus, Dr. Walter removed the victim's eyes. Once ready, he turned on the electronic impulse camera borrowed from Nina, the director of Massive Dynamics. He successfully saw an iconic building, the St. Bridge, in the image from the victim's eyes. They opened a map and matched the angle from which the victim saw the bridge. Determining her approximate location before death by triangulation from an overhead perspective, they pulled up satellite images of that block within the past 24 hours. The time a car entered and exited a warehouse coincided with the time of the crime. Olivia and Peter rushed to the warehouse. They found Professor Claus, who was conducting an experiment. The girl on the operating table was still alive. Olivia ran out to catch the killer, and Peter tried to save the girl, letting the charlatan Professor Claus slip away. Olivia also found the killer, but he had aged rapidly, turning into an old man with white hair and deep wrinkles. The dying man revealed that he was just an experiment from his father, Professor Claus. Professor Claus was supposed to kill him, but he lost his sanity because of his love for him. After the revelation, the man lost his last breath. Afterwards, Olivia thanked Nina from Massive Dynamics. Nina seemed interested in having Olivia work for her in the group. However, Philip quickly found Olivia, implying she should not reveal the case details to Nina and asking about their conversation. Dr. Walter told Olivia that one of the temptations a scientist must face was the struggle to define the boundary between man and God. He asked her to keep the truth about Peter's medical history a secret. But when she told him that Peter's medical history was not mentioned in the file, only his date of birth, the doctor felt relieved. This indicates that he has something big to hide. That night, Dr. Walter had insomnia again. Peter then sang the song that the patients at the mental hospital often sang, which helped the doctor to close his eyes and fall asleep peacefully. The third episode begins with a guy named Roy coming to the church in the morning. He sincerely prayed to the priest, begging not to see terrible things anymore. He even mentioned a terrifying event that was about to take place on a bus that day. Frightened himself, he casually left a terrifying hand-drawn picture and hastily left the church. As predicted, a man in a suit carrying a briefcase boarded a bus. He then put on a gas mask from his bag and threw a cylindrical object emitting white smoke onto the ground. The passengers began to have difficulty breathing. Meanwhile, he took advantage of the chaos and grabbed a lady's backpack from the back seat before getting off the bus. Olivia and her team received the report and rushed to the scene. The passengers were frozen inside the bus, motionless. Even Dr. Walter couldn't help but exclaim how horrific it was, saying that they were like mosquitoes trapped in amber. The doctor guessed that the substance was released in gas form before solidifying. He took a sample from the scene to further analyze in the lab. Olivia, on the other hand, tried to identify the victims by checking their personal belongings and seeing if they could find anything. At this moment, the man in the suit and his accomplice had thoroughly searched the stolen backpack, but couldn't find what they were looking for. Back in his office, Roy was restless, with haunting images flashing in his mind. Unable to help it, he drew them down. It's a woman, surrounded by darkness, her palm dripping blood. While checking the victim's personal belongings, Olivia noticed that the lady sitting by the window in the video had a backpack, which was now missing. She pulled up the lady's information and was surprised to find that she was a federal agent who worked in the Drug Enforcement Administration as a covert investigator. She had a contact, so they brought in the agent's contact for questioning, who said the agent had attempted to infiltrate a Nicaraguan drug alliance as a representative of the East Coast 3 months prior. She was supposed to meet him that day, but she didn't show up. Philip asked if he knew what item the bus attackers were after. The man shook his head. Before leaving, he requested to confirm the identity of the deceased and say his goodbyes. Philip agreed to his request. At this point, Dr. Walter had made new progress. He had reconstructed the materials brought back from the scene. These compounds would solidify upon contact with nitrogen in the air, causing rapid solidification and suffocation of the passengers. There were 3 companies in the U.S. that could provide these compounds, all of which were subsidiaries of Massive Dynamics. At this time, the colleague Charlie called. Olivia went to meet him. He said that a priest had reported that Roy had mentioned the bus incident to him before it happened. By this time, they had already arrived at Roy's room. The shocking hand-drawn pictures on the wall were all events that had happened last year, about murder cases and disasters, all of which were dated before they occurred. For example, the flight from Hamburg, the angel who took its life in Baltimore, and the collapsed bridge in Birmingham. Roy was then brought in for questioning by the FBI. Charlie held up his new drawing of a bleeding hand and asked if this would also become reality. Roy nodded painfully, saying that no matter where he was, he often received these terrifying messages in his mind for no reason. The only way to get rid of it was to try to draw or build a model of what he saw. This feeling had been going on for 9 months. Looking at Roy's sincere face in the interrogation room, Peter was convinced he was not lying. So the question was, how did he get this information? Dr. Walter gave his own opinion. He believed that Roy was a medium. Theoretically, it was likely that Roy could not control his own abilities, but would still connect with someone telepathically. But this was only a guess and needed further proof. So he did an MRI scan on Roy's brain, but Roy's vital signs suddenly became unstable, his eyes' blood vessels expanding as if they were going to burst at any second. Peter quickly turned off the machine and pulled Roy out. Dr. Walter told Roy that there was a magnetic compound in his blood that's in a dormant state, and it's likely some kind of parasite. Peter explained further that this machine was just like a giant magnet, and there was metal in his blood. If he hadn't turned off the machine, Roy would have been torn apart. Back in the lab, the doctor dug up an experiment he had once conducted with Dr. Bell. He recalled injecting an organometallic compound into the brain of a test subject. It was then Peter discovered that the test subject listed in the old experiment report was actually Roy. Enraged, he confronted his father, blaming him for Roy's near-death experience that day. The doctor, however, countered that the substances he had injected were far from enough to cause such a reaction. Rather, over time, those compounds had multiplied in his bloodstream, turning him into a receptor for information transmission. Apparently, some people had already improved the ghost network that they had been working on and were using it for communication. Roy would receive interference whenever they communicated. The doctor suspected that someone was continuing his previous experiments. Olivia asked whether they had a way to identify the perpetrator if Roy was receiving information at this frequency. The doctor excitedly replied that if Roy agreed, he could perform a minor surgery using his invention, the electromagnetic neural stimulator. Once everything was set up, the doctor placed his invented device on Roy's head and had the assistant control and adjust the instrument data. The doctor believed there were metallic clusters present in the visual center of Roy's brain. He intended to transfer them to the auditory center. Soon, something miraculous happened. When Roy saw a picture of a car, he could taste gasoline in his mouth. The doctor was thrilled. This meant the metallic clusters in Roy's brain had reached the gustatory cortex. Shortly after, Roy started uttering a series of Latin words, claiming he could hear voices he didn't understand. The assistant took notes and translated them, saying that a meeting for a transaction would take place at the South Station in an hour. The item they wanted had always been on the agent. Olivia then brought over the hand-drawn picture Roy had made and rushed to the morgue. Sure enough, she found a 3-inch cut on the agent's hand. Whatever had been on her, it must have been taken away by the agent's contact when he said goodbye to her. Olivia immediately drove to the South Station, reporting to Philip en route and requesting backup. But at this moment, Roy received new information. With his warning, Olivia quickly identified the target. However, when the target, the agent's contact, turned around, he had already been shot in the chest and fell dead. Olivia quickly realized that the agent's suitcase was missing. It seemed the transaction and handover had already happened. She ran after it, and with the help of Charlie, the killer had to drop the suitcase and the gun. But when he took a step back to escape, he was hit by a speeding car. Back at the FBI, Olivia finally saw what was in the suitcase, the thing the killer had gone to great lengths to get. The 4th episode begins with a unique customer known as the Observer visiting a diner in Brooklyn. Bald, devoid of eyebrows, and reserved, his taste was quite peculiar. He frequently pulled out a telescope, peeping at the construction site across the window and taking notes in strange characters. Suddenly, there was an explosion at the construction site. A crane collapsed, and everyone scattered in fear. Only the observer remained, finishing his water and paying for his meal before leaving the diner. He even went to the accident scene to investigate. At 3 a.m., Dr. Walter kept mumbling the ingredients of his favorite ginger ale, keeping his son awake. Annoyed, Peter decided to sleep in the hotel bathtub like a giant baby. Early the next morning, he went to Olivia to confess that he wanted to leave, but she told him that his father had said more than once that if Peter left, he would not continue assisting with the investigation. He would rather return to the mental hospital than lose Peter's company, but Peter remained skeptical about this. Soon, they were tasked to go to a warehouse. Philip said that an explosion had occurred at a construction site in Brooklyn the previous day. A crane had suddenly collapsed, causing 3 deaths and 24 injuries. Philip then showed them a metal bottle with blue light on the stripes, saying that the metal bottle had entered the gas main from an abandoned subway tunnel during the explosion. Dr. Walter took out a magnifying glass and examined it, uttering that it's solid iridium and vibrating, but he was unwilling to reveal more information, saying that he needed to take the metal bottle back to the lab for further testing. Philip added that this thing had appeared in the candy incident in 1987. A colonel had been responsible for the investigation at that time. He had already spoken to him that morning, and the colonel had decided to come and take a look. So Olivia went to visit. After a few pleasantries, the colonel said that at that time, a sergeant discovered the metal bottle while on duty at the naval base due to a sensor malfunction. It seemed to be solid metal, but it was vibrating, so he was sent to investigate. They believed it was transmitting a signal, but they could not decode it. An explosion occurred 48 hours later. The metal bottle penetrated the ground to below the basement, exploded underground, and then disappeared. He offered all these materials to her, but as a friend, he advised her to stay as far away from this thing as possible. After Dr. Walter and his party left, a man wearing a black hat arrived at the warehouse. He went on a killing spree to seize the metal bottle, but he was a step too late. Late at night, Olivia received a call from John, who was supposed to be dead. She sat up with a start, immediately dialing the central office to trace her own number, only to be informed that there was no record of any calls for nearly 3 hours. The next day, Olivia came to the lab. While reviewing the data from 1987, she discovered a familiar face in the photos, the observer. After verification, it turned out that the same man had also appeared in photos from the Quincy hospital. This was simply too weird. Olivia hastily reported this to her superior. Philip took her sexy body to an office where the walls were densely covered with photos of the observer. He praised her, saying that it took them a year to recognize him, but she did it in just 3 weeks. There's no information about the observer in the database, but he has appeared at over 30 crime scenes related to the plan as if he's observing and monitoring. But so far, his purpose and reasons for appearing are unknown. He was also at the construction site that day. Olivia told Peter about the attack at the warehouse and prepared to move the metal bottle to a secure base, but Dr. Walter refused. He sent his son away under the pretext of buying materials and, taking advantage of the assistant's unpreparedness, injected her with a sedative. When Peter came back, he found that the doctor was missing and the assistant had fainted. At the same time, the man in the black hat broke into the colonel's home. He tied the colonel to the sofa and inserted 2 metal wires into his nostrils. Even though the colonel didn't say a word, the man seemed to have mind-reading abilities, quickly getting the answers he sought. Then, he shot the colonel. Around this time, Dr. Walter came to the diner. Not long after, the observer also arrived with his bald head. It seemed like they were old friends. The observer thanked Dr. Walter for hiding the metal bottle and said he couldn't touch it himself. Just as everyone was frantically searching for Dr. Walter, Olivia received a call saying that the doctor was wandering on the 95th Interstate Highway. So they rushed to the local police station. Dr. Walter intended to hide the truth, stating only that someone was looking for the metal bottle, and he had to hide it for 4 hours so it wouldn't be taken away. He had become friends with the observer and had figured out a way to protect the metal bottle. Peter thought his father was spouting nonsense, causing Dr. Walter to get infuriated. Peter returned to the lab alone to pack up, intending to leave, but he was ambushed and kidnapped by the man in the black hat. The assistant informed Olivia about the situation at the lab. When Dr. Walter learned that his son had been kidnapped, he revealed the hiding place of the metal bottle. The culprit repeated his old trick, inserting electric wires into Peter's nostrils. Then, a strange thing happened again. Even though Peter clearly didn't know the whereabouts of the metal bottle, after some coercion, the mind-reading man seemed to know its hiding place. Subsequently, the man brought Peter to the grave of an old man and forced him to dig. Olivia arrived at the cemetery just in time. Once the man found the metal bottle, he tried to escape desperately, but the agile Olivia caught up with him and shot him dead. However, when she went to inspect the man's identity, a yellow smoke erupted from the metal bottle and disappeared into the ground. The observer hid his bald head behind a tree, witnessed everything, and was reporting to an unknown person. Suddenly, Peter appeared and tackled him to the ground. The observer looked at Peter in surprise. Then the observer was able to speak word for word what Peter had not yet said, as if he could read his mind. Suddenly, the observer shot Peter. When Peter woke up, the observer was gone. The next day, Philip told Olivia that they had dug up the entire area but had not found the metal bottle. However, they had found information about the killer. He was from Seattle, a wanted felon with many unsolved cases. Peter came out of the hospital room and told Olivia that he had seen something unexplainable. He wouldn't leave until he figured it out. That night, Dr. Walter told his son about a childhood incident when they fell into an ice hole and were rescued by the observer. He said that man shouldn't have been there, but he saved them as if he knew what Dr. Walter was thinking. He gave Dr. Walter the sense that he would need him one day. Regarding today's incident with the metal bottle, Dr. Walter was unsure how he knew about the vibrational synthesis. However, when he tested it and heard the vibrations, he felt like an envelope had been opened. He finally found himself and knew instantly that he had to protect the metal bottle for him. But he didn't know who they were and what they wanted. As a scientist, he would share these unsolvable frustrations with Olivia, but he now knew that his son was alive and sitting right here. At this point, Dr. Walter couldn't help but tear up. In the evening, when Olivia returned home, she was startled to see John, who was supposed to be dead, standing in front of her. Shocked, she dropped the bowl she was holding, shattering it on the floor. The 5th episode begins with a bearded man named Joseph being woken by his mother early this morning. Upon arriving at the courier company, he was berated by the supervisor, leaving him quite upset. Suddenly, one of the barcode scanners began to smoke and became useless, inciting another round of mockery. Joseph had been harboring a secret crush on the receptionist from a certain company. He was thrilled to see her again during a delivery, only to discover that another guy was actually her official boyfriend. Joseph's mood plummeted. Soon after, the front desk computer suddenly malfunctioned. He knew he was somehow involved and wanted to slip away, only for the receptionist to join him in the elevator. She also discovered the surreptitious photos he had taken of her, clearly considering him a pervert by the look in her eyes. Joseph was thoroughly upset. Suddenly, the elevator they were in started plummeting rapidly, ending up in an explosion at the basement level. When he regained consciousness, he found that the other passengers had all stopped breathing. Overwhelmed with guilt, he just wanted to escape, but wherever he went, the car lights would turn on and alarms would blare continuously. On Olivia's side, she told Charlie about seeing the dead John in the kitchen the night before, but Charlie dismissed her bullshit, believing that it was just a hallucination caused by her nervousness. At this point, Philip arrived at the lab and explained to everyone about an incident where an elevator fell in a building due to a strong electric field invasion. Thus, everyone rushed to the accident scene. Upon seeing the victims' injuries, Dr. Walter identified them as typical electrocution injuries. He signaled Olivia to remove her necklace, and surprisingly, it floated in midair. The doctor explained that the small space was filled with electromagnetic energy, far higher than in nature. Regardless of what killed these people, a large amount of its energy remained here. Therefore, he concluded that the passengers had died before the elevator hit the ground. Next, Dr. Walter brought a body back to the lab for research. After removing the heart and connecting it to a battery, it surprisingly started to beat again, further confirming his theory. The human brain and heart are both driven by electrical impulses. The elevator incident was caused by someone who could affect and even control electrical devices, and this person had been altered in some way. At this point, a distraught Joseph returned to the courier company. The supervisor came to trouble him again, insisting that Joseph had not adhered to the schedule. Despite Joseph's pleas, he was adamant about firing him. As a result, Joseph lost control of his emotions again, generating an electromagnetic field that trapped the supervisor's arm in a machine, leaving him in a quite gruesome state. After hearing Dr. Walter's theory in the evening, Philip passed to Olivia the data of Dr. Jacob, a biotechnologist. He explained that Jacob was wanted by 3 countries, charged with illegal human experimentation, organ transplants, and radical hormone therapies. However, finding him would not be easy. Suddenly, the lights in the office went out. Olivia, flashlight in hand, ventured into the corridor only to see the dead John emerging from the elevator. Startled, she backed away quickly. John declared that he had always loved her and would prove it to her, but for now, he just wanted to tell her that she was on the right track. The person she was looking for was also sought by Jacob. Olivia wanted to ask more, but John had already entered the elevator. She rushed downstairs, but John was already gone. She noticed the load indicator in the elevator and had an epiphany. She rushed to the hotel where Dr. Walter was staying. She said the elevator had a weight sensor, and based on the record, its weight was 1,400 pounds just before it crashed. However, the combined weight of all the victims was 1,200 pounds, indicating that a 200-pound person had walked out alive. This person is likely the experimental subject Dr. Walter mentioned. The doctor speculated that this person might be both a power source and a conductor, and the passage of a large current through him could create an electromagnetic levitation effect. This accident could likely have been caused by his inability to control his power. Therefore, they must find him before he understands his abilities. Olivia then asked Charlie to gather the team to collect abnormal reports around the building. In the evening, Joseph returned home in fear, confessing to his mother that he had caused a big mess. A few months ago, he had seen an ad in a magazine about unlocking potential. He had visited the people in the ad who hypnotized him, promising to rearrange his brain impulses to make him a more confident person. But they had tampered with him. He sought help from his mother, but his uncontrollable superpower caused his mother's heart disease to flare up. Terrified, Joseph packed his things and was about to flee when he was abducted by Jacob and his men. Olivia quickly located Joseph. When she arrived at his home, she found his mother had collapsed and died from a heart issue. Just as she was fretting over how to find Joseph, Dr. Walter came up with a solution. He took a cassette tape from Joseph's house and put it into his equipment. He explained that each person has a unique magnetic field fingerprint, which is usually too weak to detect, but Joseph's was enhanced. His signal would be much stronger than an average person's. He elaborated that the principle of a cassette tape was very simple. Once exposed to a magnetic field, it was permanently magnetized. Given Joseph's electromagnetic strength and his proximity to the tape, the doctor suspected his electronic signal marker was recorded on the tape. Peter likened it to a video recorder capturing a double image. By filtering out the music, sure enough, they found Joseph's signal signature. Dr. Walter then engraved Joseph's signal signature into a pigeon's beak and attached a GPS chip to it. His plan was to use homing pigeons to locate Joseph. At this time, Olivia saw John again. John kissed her using his juicy tongue and said she had took to heart what he told her yesterday. Just then, Peter came out to find Olivia, and John vanished into thin air without traces of his smelly hormones. Following Dr. Walter's whistle command, 24 pigeons were released, and the FBI set out in pursuit. Meanwhile, Jacob was in his lab, implanting 2 metal probes under Joseph's skin. The young man was in extreme pain, regretting his participation in the experiment and yearning to return to his old life. Suddenly, the pigeons halted and began to circle over a factory. Olivia and her team stormed the building and arrested Jacob. After a violent chase, Peter appeared, knocked out Joseph with a rod, sedated him, and put him on a stretcher. Back at the lab, Dr. Walter noticed that Olivia seemed off and asked if she had seen John. Dr. Walter explained that it's not a hallucination. When she were in the water tank, part of John's memories were transmitted to her brain. But her brain can only accommodate one voice, so her mind was rejecting him, driving his thoughts out. In the evening, as Olivia was driving home, John appeared again. She followed him to a secret office. Philip explained that all the documents indicated that John had conducted investigations related to the project here, and he knew more than they did, including the identities of 7 others like Joseph that Jacob was planning to target. Fortunately, thanks to her, they had not been activated and had been located. He handed her a box, saying it was left by John. Inside was a diamond ring he intended to give her but never got the chance to. The 6th episode begins with 2 individuals in protective suits dropping a girl's sexy body off a vehicle before quickly driving away. The girl, looking lost and terrified, wandered into a restaurant. The staff served her some water and called the police. When the police arrived, the girl couldn't remember anything, only that someone had drugged her, knocking her out and causing her harm. As the police attempted to take her in for investigation, she became agitated. Suddenly, everyone in the restaurant began to bleed from their eyes and wailed in pain. The girl's eyes started bleeding too, and shortly after, her head exploded like popcorns, killing her instantly. Olivia and her team arrived at the scene, and Philip briefed them on the situation. The incident had happened 6 hours earlier. The deceased girl, Emily, had been reported missing 2 weeks before. The radiation level in her body was 3 times higher than normal. With that, they put on their protective suits and entered the crime scene. Dr. Walter unzipped the body bag and noticed a pattern of bruises on Emily's arm. He determined that she had an incurable immune disease called lymphocytopenia. However, the disease seemed to show signs of improvement, which was unusual. Another officer reported that the temperature at the back of Emily's head was as high as 121 degrees Celsius, as though all the water molecules in her brain had evaporated rapidly, essentially cooking her brain. Later, Olivia located Emily's primary physician. When told about the improvement in Emily's condition, the doctor didn't seem surprised but denied having conducted radiation therapy on her. Dr. Walter took Emily's body and that of the policeman back to the lab for further study. Emily's corpse gave off a scent of hyacinths. Rope marks were found on her, and her veins had been injected with some sort of substance. From these clues, Dr. Walter deduced that Emily was likely a human experiment subject. Her appearance at the restaurant was probably staged to verify the effectiveness of their experimental treatment. At this point, Olivia received a call from Charlie. 4 hours earlier, another missing person case was reported in Massachusetts. The missing woman, Claire, was diagnosed with lymphocytopenia 4 years ago. Charlie accompanied Olivia to Claire's home, presenting Emily's photo to Claire's husband, but he claimed not to know her. The husband mentioned that his wife's condition had been improving for the last 6 weeks and asked Olivia to help find her. As suspected, Claire was being held captive in a lab and subjected to human experiments. The experimenters stated that Emily, who appeared at the restaurant, was just a test, and this was the real deal. On Dr. Walter's side, he demonstrated the tragic event in the restaurant. Peter explained that it's similar to the principle of heating food in a microwave, with Emily acting as the microwave. The assistant curiously asked how Emily could cook people. The doctor replied that they found a radioactive isotope in her blood. These microcapsules are designed to release this isotope at specific times and in specific amounts to treat her disease. However, in Emily's case, this treatment turned her into an ideal candidate for a human weapon experiment. The substance injected into her blood by the experimenters caused these capsules to burst immediately, emitting microwave radiation. This reminded Olivia of Emily's primary physician, leading her to decide to talk to Emily's parents first. Emily's mother recognized Claire, saying she was her daughter's good friend. She then presented a photo of her daughter with Claire and her husband, revealing that Claire's husband had lied. Faced with the evidence, he confessed that his wife and Emily met while waiting for their blood tests. Both suffering from the same disease, they quickly became good friends. One day, they started discussing how medical treatments had abandoned them. Only 3,000 people were infected with lymphocytopenia. Due to the small number of patients, pharmaceutical companies could not profit from a cure, so the patients were left to self-treat. 3 months ago, they found an antidote, a radiative release capsule. The reason for his secrecy was that his wife's life depended on this cure. Olivia asked for a list of patients and a sample of the antidote. The man directed her to Emily's primary physician. She quickly found the physician, who seemed very scared and claimed he was innocent, saying his only job was to report to a pharmaceutical company. Under further questioning from Olivia, he mentioned a name, David, and then shockingly shooting himself to meet Jesus. David is the big boss of the pharmaceuticals, a company with a vast and complex background, specializing in research that defies common understanding. Charlie mentioned that David would be speaking today at the Manhattan Humanitarian Aid Forum, so Olivia ventured alone into the conference. She attempted to ingratiate herself with the others, but David was exceptionally cautious. Eventually, Olivia revealed her FBI identity, but David was not intimidated. Instead, he threatened her by using her family. Soon, her superior received a complaint about her. Philip found Olivia and criticized her for being too emotionally involved and for startling the suspect. But she argued that Claire was still in their hands and she couldn't afford to worry about political issues. Meanwhile, in David's lab, his assistant placed a white mouse into Claire's room. Terrified and unable to move, Claire's fear triggered another radiation release, and the mouse exploded instantly. Olivia was in a terrible mood, unable to find any leads on David. She took her frustrations out on Peter, but quickly realized her mistake and apologized. She opened up about her past, how she had shot her abusive stepfather when she was younger. After he recovered, he disappeared but sent her birthday cards every year to remind her of his existence. In an effort to help, Peter secretly approached Nina, David's competitor. In exchange for a future favor, Nina gave him the location of David's secret lab. At the same time, Dr. Walter finally developed an antidote to prevent the microcapsules in the patient's blood from exploding. Peter gave the secret lab location to Olivia, who immediately contacted Charlie. They stormed the lab with an armed team. Seeing things turning sour, David's assistant stimulated Claire's microcapsules before she was arrested. In the nick of time, Claire injected herself with the antidote Olivia handed her, saving her shitty life. Olivia then arrested the arrogant David in the lab. Back at her superior's office, she admitted she had acted emotionally, but she argued that it helped her empathize with the victims and see the world through their eyes. Even if it was scary, she believed it made her a better agent. After David's arrest, his company's stock plummeted, which was excellent news for its competitor, Massive Dynamics. Olivia then realized the source of the information. She confronted Peter, asking what Nina had asked for in return. Peter just smiled and said he was grown up and could take care of himself. There was an awkward moment as their eyes met, and Olivia intentionally looked away. When she got home in the evening, she received another birthday card from her stepfather. The 7th episode takes place at a night when a FBI agent, Mitchell, was tasked with tracking a shipment. When the goods arrived at the dock and were loaded onto a truck, they intercepted it. But upon opening the truck's cargo hold, they found nothing but a pile of panda toys. The next day, he reported the situation to Philip, suggesting a possible information leak. Mid-conversation, Mitchell suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. He was rushed to the hospital, but the sight that greeted the surgeon was shocking, something resembling a shark's mouth in Mitchell's chest, opening and closing rhythmically with each heartbeat. The paranormal investigation team arrived at the hospital. Philip explained that Captain Mitchell had just returned from a mission in Frankfurt a week ago and was both a colleague and a friend. He pleaded for Dr. Walter's help. The doctor, upon examining the patient and the peculiar thing inside him, remarked on its beauty, symmetrically distributed as if genetically hybridized. If it were an organism, it seemed designed to devour the heart. Subsequently, the doctor transferred the patient to his own lab, hypothesizing that it was a type of parasite, though its attachment method was strange. Meanwhile, his assistant handed the patient's recent case files to Olivia and informed her that Mitchell's wife was waiting outside. She wanted to know about her husband's condition and why he was moved from the hospital. Olivia assured her that they would do their best to save her husband's shitty life. The wife later handed over 2 items her husband had brought back from his trip. The doctor separated some tissue from the parasite for DNA analysis. Looking at the DNA sequence, he pointed out its repeating pattern. So orderly it seemed unnatural, too perfect to be real. Olivia understood that someone had deliberately arranged the DNA this way. The assistant suggested it might be a code, recalling her cryptography studies before joining the FBI. She noted a sequence of 3 letters, repeating within the parasite's DNA. Olivia suddenly thought of a terrorist organization named ZFT and shared her thoughts with Philip. He handed her a file of a British man named Jones, arrested at Frankfurt Airport a month ago for possession of national secrets. Jones was skilled in biotechnology, especially genetic weapons. He had worked as a senior researcher at the Bremer Research Center 12 years ago and had recently resurfaced, often operating in Eastern Europe. It turned out that Mitchell had been investigating him. Philip thought Jones might be from ZFT, and his attack on Mitchell a form of retaliation. He continued, explaining that ZFT was different from typical terrorists. They trafficked in scientific experiments and innovations. He referenced the incidents with Flight 627 and Mitchell as examples. Olivia concluded that what happened to Mitchell might be one of those experiments, and she decided to visit Jones in Frankfurt's prison. Mitchell's situation is critical. Peter found the roots of the parasite in the IV bag. It seems the parasite is spreading faster than anticipated. Dr. Walter said that he might only have a day left. Olivia quickly arrived in Frankfurt and headed straight for the prison. After some negotiation, the warden agreed to deliver a note to Jones on her behalf. Meanwhile, Agent Charlie found some clues about ZFT. He told Philip that they had found documents sent back from Frankfurt. Each one corresponded to an FBI case, and each identification code corresponded to one or several related agents. All of these agents were from their department, so he suspected there was a mole in their department. Among the local links, one was a phone line registered to a Joe. Philip remembered that Mitchell was reporting on the same Joe just before he collapsed. After asking for the address, Philip immediately called in an anti-terrorism squad from headquarters to surround Joe's house and requested the call to be shut down. At the same time, Olivia received a message from the warden saying that Jones had agreed to meet her, but it would have to be the next morning, and they would only have 14 minutes. He handed her a note from Jones. As soon as she read the note, she called Peter. She needed to find Philip and told Peter that Jones agreed to meet her in the morning. However, he requested to meet someone named Joe. Philip couldn't reach Peter because the call was shut down. He had to go in person to ensure that Joe was not shot. But when Peter arrived, it was too late. Joe had been shot dead for resisting arrest. Dr. Walter asked him to bring the body back to the lab. After hooking up the body's head to a machine and immersing it in ice, the body began to shudder non-stop. After some adjustments, Dr. Walter connected the other end of the machine to his son's head. This made Peter's brain a passive receiver. Meanwhile, Olivia had arrived at the prison to meet Jones. She told him that Joe had been arrested by her colleagues. To test her, Jones then asked where his friend Joe lived. But when the assistant relayed the question and asked twice, Peter said he didn't receive any response from Joe yet. The doctor had no choice but to increase the voltage. When asked for the third time, Peter drew many vertical lines on the paper. The prison guard had come to hurry Olivia twice to leave, and she was extremely anxious. Dr. Walter guessed that the body's ability to process horizontal lines was affected because the brain was shot, so he asked Peter to fill them in. Peter finally drew the missing horizontal lines. The word was Little Hill. When Jones heard Little Hill, he looked very surprised, indicating the answer was correct. Jones kept his promise and gave the formula to kill the parasite. Dr. Walter hastily concocted a medicine according to the formula and injected it into the parasite. The parasite's roots were swiftly eliminated, and Mitchell was saved. Philip came to the ward and informed Mitchell of a potential mole within the FBI, unbeknownst to him that Mitchell himself was the mole. It turned out it was all part of a ruse Mitchell had orchestrated with his wife in order to regain contact with Jones and obtain the answer to their question, Little Hill. The 8th episode begins on a night of pouring rain when a father and son were driving home. They spotted a woman by the roadside seeking help. Her car had broken down and her phone was conveniently out of order. The man got out of his car to assist her, calling a tow truck for her. The woman mentioned her urgent need to attend a meeting, so the kind-hearted man decided to try and fix her car rather than her hormones. As soon as he opened the hood, however, he was entranced by the alternating red and green lights. It was only when the tow truck driver arrived and tapped his shoulder that he snapped out of it. But by then, his son, the woman, and her broken-down car had all vanished mysteriously. He couldn't help but scream in disbelief. The head officer, Philip, briefed the paranormal investigation team on the case. The missing boy's name was Ben. His father insisted that something strange had occurred while he was looking at the woman's car, as though time had skipped. A similar incident had happened 10 years prior. The 3 kidnapped victims all claimed to have seen the woman, but facial recognition software turned up nothing. Dr. Walter then said that the flashing lights were just like Christmas lights, but he was unsure why he knew this. Olivia subsequently went to the missing boy's house for investigation. Ben's father insisted that he hadn't been hallucinating. He had clearly seen the woman and her car, but no one believed him, and he was even treated as a suspect. He pleaded with Olivia to help find his son, to which she replied they suspected that this woman was involved in other kidnappings too, but Ben's case was different. The other 3 victims were all geniuses in their respective fields. Upon hearing this, the man revealed that his son could also be considered a genius. He continued, saying that 9 months ago his wife and son were in a car accident on the way to school. His wife died on the spot, but Ben woke up after being unconscious for 6 days. After hearing of his mother's death, he didn't say a word and started playing the piano. But before this, he had never attended a piano lesson. 2 weeks later, he was composing his own music. At this moment, Ben was sitting in a corner, tapping his foot in rhythm. He saw the woman who had kidnapped him and roared like a goose that he wanted to go home to see his daddy. However, the woman told him she could take him to see his mommy. Dr. Walter recalled a time when he was hired to design a complex pattern of flashing lights for an advertising company. The goal was to create a subliminal hypnotic state, causing viewers to buy their products involuntarily. He quickly created a model of the flashing light machine and tested it on his son. Sure enough, Peter was hypnotized by the flashing lights. When he woke up, several hours had passed, but he was completely unaware. His sleeves had been cut by his dad, indicating the experiment was successful. Meanwhile, Agent Charlie had made a discovery. The kidnapper was called Joanne. Records showed that she had died in a car accident 10 years ago, 8 months before the series of kidnappings began. It was reported that her car had plunged off a bridge. Although the car was found, no body was discovered. Dr. Walter suddenly became excited and said that he remembered his roommate Kim from the mental hospital. Kim had mentioned being kidnapped by a woman after being hypnotized by a Christmas tree. So Olivia found Philip and asked for support. However, to see Kim, government approval was needed, a process that would take at least 6 weeks. He handed her a fax. At this point, Joanne took Ben to a room with a piano. When Ben looked away from the music score, he saw his deceased mother. His mother asked him to finish the piece of music as Joanne had instructed. Olivia came to the lab and showed Dr. Walter a photo of the crime scene where Kim had committed his crime. Dr. Walter confirmed that this was the equation that had been bothering Kim for a long time. After watching a video of Ben playing music, Peter said that the formula might be a rhythm because music is a mathematical language and every chord has its mathematical meaning. Upon hearing this, Dr. Walter quickly transcribed the equation into sheet music and asked Peter to play it according to the score. Surprisingly, it was the same piece that Ben was playing, even though the two of them had never met. The doctor wasn't surprised and explained this as a coincidence of great minds thinking alike. Then Olivia went to the mental hospital and asked the dean for help. However, he wouldn't allow Kim to see strangers. If they insisted on meeting, only Dr. Walter could do so. Peter strongly disagreed, but Dr. Walter was desperate to help. He was willing to give it a try. With a nervous heart, Dr. Walter walked into the mental hospital, but Kim didn't admit to ever talking about the traffic lights. Seeing this, Dr. Walter wrote out the equation. Seeing it, Kim collapsed and started screaming hysterically. The other patients were disturbed and started to get agitated. Dr. Walter, unwilling to give up, pressed Kim for answers. The dean hurriedly ordered his man to inject Dr. Walter with a sedative and detained him in the mental hospital. Peter couldn't negotiate Dr. Walter's release with the dean, so he had to ask Olivia to seek support. At the same time, Peter analyzed the alias used by the kidnapper and traced it back to an email address from Clarksburg. Consequently, Olivia ordered the search area to be expanded to include Clarksburg. Ben had been struggling to finish the piece of music he was playing. Suddenly, he saw his mother's face begin to bleed, and then her entire face transformed into how she looked in the car accident. He was terrified. Joanne kept pressuring him, saying only if he finished the piece could he save his mother. The next day, Dr. Walter once again persuaded Kim to disclose the location where he was held captive during his kidnapping. Kim was in extreme pain. After a fierce mental struggle, he finally revealed the truth. Initially, the woman had promised to give him what he most wanted. However, when he was unable to explain the equation, the woman tortured those he loved, leaving them shattered, just like how the current kidnapper was treating Ben, torturing him with his beloved mother and forcing him to finish the piece. Encouraged by the doctor, Kim finally revealed that it was a dungeon in a red castle. During their investigation in Clarksburg, Agent Charlie and Olivia came across a building that resembled a red castle. They rushed to the place, and in a basement room, Olivia found Ben, unconscious and fitted with a device. However, while chasing the suspect, Joanne hypnotized Olivia using traffic lights and escaped. Finally, Peter managed to bring his father home with the required documents. He didn't want his father to return to the mental hospital ever again. On Joanne's side, she found Agent Mitchell with the solved equation. There, she witnessed Mitchell place an apple in a safe. After entering the numbers on the computer, Mitchell astonishingly pulled the apple out through the safe door as if reaching through the wall. The experiment was a success, but Mitchell proved disloyal, pulling out a gun and shooting Joanne. Ben finally returned to his father's arms. Watching the father and son reunite, Olivia couldn't hide her relief and contentment. The 9th episode begins with Mark, an analyst from Massive Dynamics, having just finished a project briefing. Unexpectedly, a butterfly landed on his fingertip. Just as he was marveling at the sight, the butterfly suddenly cut a wound on his finger and then stung his cheek. In a fit of rage, Mark killed the butterfly, but then more butterflies attacked him. Desperately dodging them, he watched as the butterflies flew into the ventilation duct one by one. Driven by curiosity, he approached, only to be ambushed by hundreds of butterflies. Unable to escape, he was overwhelmed by pain and, in a state of panic, he shattered a window and fell to his death. The paranormal investigation team arrived at the scene. The doctor found that besides the wounds caused by the shattered glass, compound fractures, and extensive internal bleeding, there were many delicate wounds on the deceased's body. Peter also noticed the wounds under the shirt. If they were caused by broken glass, why wasn't the shirt torn? With these questions, Dr. Walter took the body back to the lab for further research. Just then, Olivia spotted the dead John amongst the crowd of onlookers, but he disappeared in the blink of an eye. Later, Olivia found Nina, the director of Massive Dynamics, but didn't gain anything. She and her colleague Charlie went to the deceased's home to look for clues. Olivia found a plane ticket to Omaha for 3 days later and a notebook. For a moment, she saw the butterfly specimen on the wall move, but it quickly returned to its original state. Back at the lab, the doctor discovered that the delicate wounds extended to the bone, as if they originated from within the body. They penetrated the body tissues upwards, but it was still unknown how they were caused. As Olivia was about to rest in the evening, she suddenly received an email from John. The content was just an address. When she got there and pushed open the dusty, cobwebbed door, she walked through a dark passage and found many neatly stacked plastic boxes. Upon opening the box, she was startled to find it filled with lively toads. Soon, Olivia received a call from the assistant, telling her that Dr. Walter speculated Mark, the guy who jumped off the building, was likely killed by toads. Olivia hurried back to the lab. The doctor showed them an experiment conducted a long time ago on mentally ill patients. When the subject was highly suggestible, his hallucinations caused physical changes. The doctor said the Colorado toad, discovered by Olivia, secretes a substance that stimulates the human brain. In Mark's body was an unidentifiable secretion, exactly the toxin secreted by the toad's skin. Perhaps after human processing, it became a powerful hallucinogen. It stimulates the amygdala, the fear center of the human brain. Olivia realized that Mark was hypnotized, believing that his body was being cut open, and his thoughts made it a reality. The doctor believed this was a murder because the drug concentration in Mark's blood was at least 30 times that of a normal person, indicating someone had deliberately drugged him. Then Olivia stopped Dr. Walter and told him that the location where she found the toads was given to her by John. The doctor said that John's memories were still in her brain. Olivia asked the doctor to help her get rid of this condition. She couldn't bear the dead John constantly appearing in her life. Even if going back to the tank would cause side effects, she was willing to take the risk. After making some preparations, Olivia entered the sensory deprivation tank. Through deep hypnosis, she arrived at the restaurant where she and John had their first date. Even though the doctor said that the John she was seeing only existed in her memory and couldn't possibly see her, when she received news of Mark's murder, the John in her memory suddenly turned to her and smiled. After a flash of light, Olivia found herself in John's car. She stepped out of the car and saw there were 4 people in total, including John, 2 stranger men, and shockingly, Mark. When Mark and one man left, she followed. She heard the man tell Mark to do his part of the job and they would cover for him. Suddenly, John brutally stabbed the other stranger in the stomach. Startled, Olivia quickly called for help and Peter pulled her out of the tank. Later, the assistant helped Olivia sketch out the man who manipulated Mark and survived. She was determined to find him. She sought out Philip and shared her thoughts. She believed Mark was killed because he sold the technology to a buyer in the black market. She also suspected that Massive Dynamics was producing synthetic hallucinogens, with the man acting as the liaison with the buyers. She asked Philip to help her get all the project information Mark was involved in. Philip soon handed the information over to her. After opening the information, Olivia found inspiration from a business card. She cross-referenced the words shown on Mark's notebook with the numbers on a telephone keypad, turning it into a phone number. After dialing the number, she recognized the voice on the other end as the man who manipulated Mark in her vision. They then started tracking the number while pursuing by car. The man, named George, was a cunning black market businessman. He had bought 2 tickets to Sao Paulo that morning and was presumably on his way to the airport. During the pursuit, George's car was overturned, but fortunately he was not seriously injured. In the hospital, George asked the police to protect him from Massive Dynamics. He claimed he didn't kill anyone, but it was Massive Dynamics that killed Mark. He also revealed that the incident on Flight 627 was a hoax and a diversion so Massive Dynamics could act with impunity. He demanded immunity and proper protection. The reason he trusted Olivia was that John had mentioned her. Olivia returned to Massive Dynamics to seek the truth from Nina, but she insisted it was all Olivia's imagination. However, at that moment, George was also drugged. He hallucinated that the deceased John came to his room and slit his throat. But when the nurse entered the room, she didn't see anyone else, just George's throat being slowly cut open. The nurse screamed in fright. In the evening, Olivia sought out the doctor, wanting to re-enter the sensory deprivation tank. She had numerous questions that perhaps only John could answer. But out of concern for her physical and mental health, the doctor rejected her request. Late at night, Olivia woke up to find her computer had mysteriously turned on. It was an email from John saying that he saw her at the restaurant. The 10th episode begins with the vault of the Philadelphia Mutual Savings Bank being infiltrated by thieves. Led by Agent Mitchell, a gang of 5 utilized advanced technology to resonate the walls of the vault, allowing them to walk through it. They used a thermal lance to steal safe number 610. However, during their escape, a man named Raoul stayed behind to pull out the cable, missing the optimal timing and getting stuck in the wall. Cold-hearted Mitchell shot him dead on the spot, leading the team out of the bank. The paranormal event investigation team arrived at the scene shortly after. After observing, Philip said that this incident might be related to a recent series of bank robberies. Each time, the thieves would only steal one oversized safe, without any evidence of security breaches. Olivia recognized the deceased and quickly shared a wealth of information about Raoul. The scene then shifted to Jones meeting with a lawyer in prison. The lawyer informed him that the job in Philadelphia was done. Jones, pleased, asked the lawyer to relay a message to his man to give Mitchell $100,000 and tell him the location of the next item. Olivia visited Raoul's home in New Jersey. She was received by Raoul's wife, who told her Raoul had moved out 2 years ago and they hadn't been in contact for several months. Ever since Raoul returned from the battlefield, he had become very depressed and took to drinking. Olivia seemed familiar with Raoul's wife, reminiscing about the past. But the wife confessed she didn't know Olivia, saying that on the day Raoul was promoted to lieutenant, only she, Raoul, and John were home celebrating. Olivia suddenly froze, as if she had realized something. At this point, Dr. Walter sawed off one of Raoul's hands, intending to take it back to the lab for research. Both he and Peter saw that something was off with Olivia. Upon their questioning, she revealed that she didn't actually know Raoul, but her dead boyfriend did. Her memories with John had become muddled. Back at the lab, the doctor inserted a doll into a beaker filled with rice. As he vibrated the beaker, the doll gradually sank into the rice. The doctor explained that the thieves used high-frequency vibrations to disrupt the atomic structure of the vault wall, allowing another solid material to pass through. However, this technique was quite complex and would cause radiation poisoning. Olivia returned to the lab and shared that those stolen safes were all purchased 23 years ago with cash, and each account used a pseudonym. So she was planning to start with Raoul's friends to see if they could find anything. She and Peter then went to a bar where Raoul's high school buddy worked. After striking up a conversation, they learned that Raoul rarely came by after his retirement. Initially, he frequently visited the veteran's home. So Olivia asked Philip to look into the veteran's home while she and Peter stayed at the bar playing cards. During their casual conversation, Peter heard familiar, safe numbers. They immediately rushed back to the hotel to wake Dr. Walter. The doctor had been reciting these Fibonacci numbers every night. But when he learned that 233, 377, and 610 were the numbers of the stolen safes, he suddenly realized that these were his own rented safes. However, he couldn't remember what he had stored in them. At this point, Philip brought Raoul's information. After Raoul separated from his wife, he moved to Washington and stayed at a veteran's home there. Meanwhile, employees of Massive Dynamics managed to decode the final image left in John's optic nerve before his death. It was related to another kind of brainwave echo, precisely the image of Olivia. She said there must exist some form of consciousness sharing between them. The memories they needed were in her consciousness. Subsequently, Olivia visited the veteran's home where Raoul used to go. From a caregiver, she learned that Raoul used to play chess all day. He had written down the names of 4 other members of the chess club for her. Charlie found that one of the thieves, a veteran, had bought 3 one-way tickets to Providence Green Airport and landed 47 minutes ago. Olivia immediately called Peter. Guided by his son, Dr. Walter mentioned the bank where he might have rented a safe. Olivia and her colleagues rushed to this savings bank, but safe number 987 had already been stolen. Given the complexity of the vault structure, Olivia inferred that the thief might have escaped through the sewer. She rushed out of the bank and caught a thief about to get into a car. After successfully obtaining the device, Mitchell immediately informed his employer. At this point, Jones asked his lawyer to bring his appeal documents the next morning. He also instructed his associates to find the woman in the portrait. Despite Olivia's repeated questioning, the thief kept his mouth shut. Peter noticed the thief's trembling hands and had an idea. He walked into the interrogation room and accurately described the man's current health condition, stating he was suffering from radiation poisoning. The thief finally broke his silence to save his own life, but he genuinely did not know much. He only mentioned a place called Seaford. Olivia immediately identified a place within the Seaford area on a map, a place called Little Hill Airport, which Joe had mentioned before. So she and Charlie split up, planning to ambush the Little Hill Airport from both sides. Meanwhile, Peter returned to the lab. Looking at his son, Dr. Walter suddenly remembered that Peter had Western syndrome as a child. He had designed a machine to travel through time and bring back a deceased doctor who could cure Western syndrome. Dr. Walter remembered that he had hidden this treasured machine in the safe. Intrigued, Peter asked if that machine could really travel through time. Dr. Walter replied that Peter recovered before they could test it, but theoretically, time travel was entirely possible. At night, Mitchell led his team to Little Hill. They set up the device and accurately adjusted the coordinates. Meanwhile, Jones killed his lawyer in prison, changed into his clothes, and stood in a corner. During this time, Mitchell had someone intercept Olivia, who was driving to Little Hill. A dazzling white light suddenly appeared on the abandoned airfield. Miraculously, Jones had teleported from a German prison to this location. The 11th episode begins with Olivia being intercepted on her journey to the Little Hill. After she went missing, Philip anxiously mobilized all the police forces in the department. A carpet-style search was launched near Little Hill. Meanwhile, Olivia was tied up in a surgical exchange vehicle. A masked man flipped the bed over and gave her a spinal injection. This man was Mitchell, an FBI agent. After removing his mask, he hurried back to his office. Pretending to need water, Olivia took the opportunity to attack the two men in the room. She knocked the guard unconscious and quickly put several test tubes from the lab into a thermos. After grabbing a gun and the car keys, she made her escape. Once in the car, she contacted Philip, asking him to quickly dispatch people to meet with her. Just in case, she stopped the car and buried the thermos in a pile of dirt. She then arrived at the rendezvous point to wait for support. Unexpectedly, a colleague pointed a gun at her as soon as they met. Olivia tried to run but was shot with a tranquilizer dart and fell to the ground. When she woke up, she found herself in a hospital, handcuffed. Sitting next to her was a man named Harris, who had sexually assaulted 3 women and whom she had brought to court and convicted. Seeing Harris, she understood that this bald man bore a grudge against her. This time, assigned by the Department of Homeland Security to supervise Philip's Fringe division, Harris had a blatant chance for revenge. Afterwards, Olivia returned to her office. Charlie said that he had taken people to the place where she had been tied up, but there was nothing there. The gun she had grabbed at the time only had her fingerprints on it, but she trusted her own sanity. She informed Dr. Walter that they should meet outside Harvard University in 10 minutes. Then, she led the doctor and his son to where she had hidden the thermos. After digging it up, she handed the test tubes inside to the doctor for analysis. Meanwhile, at Boston College, Professor Kinberg, who was in the middle of a lecture, suddenly collapsed. Despite the assistant's immediate attempt at resuscitation, it was to no avail. Shockingly, a gigantic slug crawled out of the professor's mouth. The creature moved so fast it sent students running in all directions. Olivia and her team quickly arrived at the scene. It turned out that Professor Kinberg was an immunology expert. Dr. Walter initially determined that the cause of death was suffocation, as the slug had pierced the professor's esophagus on its way out. Peter managed to capture the creature on a thermal camera, but it was moving too quickly. While everyone else was at a loss, the doctor easily caught it using a trash bin. He then took it back to the lab for testing. He discovered that the creature's organic matter matched the material in the test tube stolen by Olivia from her kidnappers. Philip found his superior, Harris, saying that despite his authorized interrogation of Olivia, Harris couldn't tranquilize her as if she's a rabid dog. On her end, Olivia sought out Professor Kinberg's assistant for questioning, but she wasn't cooperative. It wasn't until Olivia revealed her affair with the married professor that she began to talk. Olivia then reported back to Philip. Apparently, the Center for Disease Control had offered Professor Kinberg a new job opportunity, co-running a special task force. He was responsible for responding to epidemics, and he wasn't the only scientist invited. Another was Professor Russell from Cambridge University. Olivia believed Russell would be the next target and must be protected. At this point, Dr. Walter had confirmed that the slug that killed Professor Kinberg and the evidence taken from the kidnappers were genetically identical. They inferred that the murderers of the professor and the kidnappers of Olivia were the same group. Olivia speculated that someone might be planning to unleash an epidemic. Otherwise, why would they kill an expert in epidemics? Philip agreed with her view and told her to proceed. Olivia and Charlie then set off to Cambridge to escort Professor Russell, which was overheard by Mitchell. They quickly brought Russell back to the investigation bureau. However, Harris pulled Olivia aside, accusing her of wasting taxpayers' money. She was frustrated, but she pleaded with him, saying that Professor Russell might die if he didn't receive FBI's protection, so she needed Harris to do the right thing. Harris agreed. Peter then told Olivia that the thing that came out of Professor Kinberg's mouth was activated by liquid. The yellow powder in the stolen test tube was eggs, and stomach acid was the catalyst. So as soon as the victim ingested it, it would grow rapidly. And just at this moment, Mitchell poured the yellow powder into water and handed it to Professor Russell. When Charlie walked into the interrogation room, he happened upon the scene of Russell falling ill. By then, Dr. Walter had concluded that the slug was, in fact, a rhinovirus. Despite its enormous size, it was still a single-celled specimen of a common cold virus. Peter explained that someone had enlarged the cold virus. Clearly, they were playing games with them. They were putting on a show, using a cold virus to kill an epidemic expert. The next day, Olivia noticed Mitchell's shoes, stained with a white spot. She recalled that these were the very shoes the masked man was wearing when he performed the spinal tap on her. This discovery sent chills down her spine. She secretly sought Charlie's help, but Charlie, being part of law enforcement, couldn't intervene, so she had to ask Peter to wiretap Mitchell's home phone. Olivia went to Mitchell's house alone. Just as she was about to pick the lock, Mitchell's wife appeared. She invited her in, and while making tea, she secretly called her husband. Mitchell instructed her to seize the opportunity to kill Olivia. On the other side, Olivia had surreptitiously opened the desk drawer and found a folder. Pictures of the rhinovirus popped out at her. Peter, who was eavesdropping, immediately called to warn her that Mitchell's wife was planning to kill her. Olivia, now alert, shot her in the head before she could act, causing her to die on the spot. But when she returned to the office, Mitchell had already run away. Peter said Mitchell didn't know about his wife's death, so they could stake out near his house and use his wife's phone to bait him. The plan worked, and they successfully captured Mitchell, but he refused to admit anything. Olivia then showed him a photo of his wife's corpse, intentionally enraging him. He confessed, but shockingly told Olivia that they kidnapped her just to protect her. Instead, they saved her, and she didn't know anything. His words didn't seem like a lie, which left Olivia confused. She didn't understand what Mitchell meant by saying they had saved her. Peter comforted her without a kiss, saying that Mitchell was just trying to confuse her because she had just killed his wife. The father and son advised Olivia to go home and rest. That night, she fell into a deep sleep, hugging her niece. The 12th episode shifts to a young boy, Gregory, ending a phone call with his friend when a message popped up on his computer. Curious, he clicked OK. A series of changing images appeared on the screen, captivating Gregory's attention. So much so, he didn't even hear when his mother spoke to him. He was so engrossed that he was moved to tears. Then a terrifying hand reached out from the screen, lunging towards his head. The next day, Olivia and Charlie visited the deceased Gregory's home to understand the situation. According to his mother, the boy's lifestyle was normal, and he was just like any other night, sitting in front of the computer, playing games, downloading songs, and chatting with friends. Dr. Walter announced after his examination that Gregory's brain had been liquefied. Upon inspecting Gregory's computer, the assistant discovered that the hard disk had been melted. Later, Olivia sought out Gregory's friend, Luke, to understand the situation better. Upon hearing the news of his friend's death, Luke was devastated. He said that their fathers had worked together, so they knew each other since childhood and had been friends ever since. At this point, the car sales company reported another victim named Anton. His death was similar to Gregory's, with his brain liquefied and leaking out. The witness was his co-worker, who described Anton as an honest man with 3 children. There was no special event before the incident. Back in the lab, the assistant told Olivia that the hard disk in Anton's computer was completely melted, just like Gregory's. From the files that could be retrieved, both computers had downloaded a large file before crashing. However, it would take a few days to trace the source of the file. Upon hearing this, Peter unplugged the hard drive and sought help from his IT friend. The friend explained that the program was extremely complex, containing embedded audio and video and some elements that weren't computer code, but parallel packet forwarding routes. Clearly, whoever uploaded the program went to great lengths to cover their tracks. Although the IT friend couldn't find the source, he found out that someone was currently downloading the file, and their address happened to be Olivia's home. Peter immediately called to inform her. At this moment, Olivia's young niece, Ella, was playing a coloring game on Olivia's computer. Olivia was racing home in her car, trying to call her sister, but her sister was in the kitchen preparing dinner and didn't hear the phone ringing. By now, Ella had clicked on a video and was staring at it curiously. She was gradually being hypnotized, and a monstrous hand was reaching out from the screen. Just in the nick of time, Olivia burst through the front door, followed closely by Peter. Little Ella was staring blankly ahead and took a long time to snap out of it. Afterwards, Ella said she saw a weird, glowing hand reaching out from the screen, which was very scary. Olivia rushed to the computer and noticed that the webcam light was still on. The culprit at the other end of the computer was watching Olivia. This man was none other than Luke's father. After learning that all of Ella's vital signs were normal, Olivia breathed a sigh of relief. She said the person who planned this might be watching them through the computer. Although it sounded far-fetched, a computer program had indeed killed people. Meanwhile, another case of brain liquefaction had occurred in the suburbs of Chicago. Dr. Walter told Olivia that he had figured out the cause of death. It was a complex mix of visual and subsonic auditory stimuli, cleverly designed to amplify the electrical impulses in the human brain and trap it in a deadly loop. As for the hand that Ella saw reaching out from the computer screen, it could be a hallucination caused by brain stimulation, but further research was needed. At this point, the assistant had brought the latest victim's information. According to his background, the deceased victim was Luke's stepfather. The odds of Luke being connected to both victims were too small, unless Luke was the murderer. But when Luke heard about Gregory's death, he was truly saddened. He also mentioned that he knew the victims because their fathers had been colleagues. Soon, Olivia and the assistant agreed that Luke's father, Brian, was a major suspect. He had worked for Gregory's father in the past and was fired 6 years ago. It was known that Brian was a programmer, and when he was fired, he was furious. Moreover, the deceased Luke's stepfather had married Brian's ex-wife, and their divorce had been very contentious. The relationship between Anton and Brian was yet to be investigated. Olivia and Charlie couldn't find Brian, so they brought his son Luke in for questioning. Harris urged Olivia to use methods to force Luke to confess, but after a simple questioning, Olivia let him go. Olivia then followed Luke to his father's hideout. Luke tearfully asked his father why he had killed these people. Agitated, Brian said that these people didn't give him a chance. By this time, Olivia had opened the door to the equipment room, but Brian and his son were gone. All the screens in the room played the terrifying murder video. Brian appeared from behind Olivia, gun in hand, emotionally held it to his own chin, claiming it was their fault. He just wanted them to taste the pain they had caused him. Regardless of the advice, he stared at his masterpiece on the screen in despair and pulled the trigger. Luke, scared by the sight of his father's death, tried to flee but was caught by Harris, who was from the Department of Homeland Security. Later, Harris went to Philip's office to complain that Olivia had blatantly disobeyed orders, let Luke go, and attempted to catch the suspect without backup. Philip, however, retorted righteously, saying that even though Harris made things difficult for Olivia, she still solved the case, and Harris was abusing his power to vent personal anger. If Harris continued to be obstinate, he would rather lose his job than not protect her. The 13th episode takes place on Flight 718. Amid the hum of the plane's engines, a scholarly-looking man starts bleeding from his nose. He rushes to the restroom, mixes his saliva with a reagent in a vial, and to his horror, the solution turns blood red. He seeks the help of a flight attendant, asking for sedatives, explaining that there's something wrong with his health. Although skeptical, the attendant relays emergency procedures to him and leaves him in the restroom. Unexpectedly, his teeth start falling out, followed by agonizing screams. Bizarrely, sharp spikes protrude from his back, and he transforms into a gigantic hedgehog-like creature, bursting out of the restroom. Following this, the plane crashes. Members of Fringe Division arrive at the crash site at once, locating the monstrous man. Dr. Walter turns him over for examination, concluding that he must have undergone some form of mutation to transform into such a state. Olivia scans through the passenger details and soon recognizes the man as Marshall, having encountered him in John's memories. She collects all available information about him, convinced that he is the suspect, the hedgehog monster. Back at the office, she points to a client of Marshall's from the US in his file, saying this client named Daniel runs an import-export company. He's the person Marshall flew over to meet. They need to bring him in for questioning. Charlie, puzzled, asks if it's another one of her intuitions. She quietly tells him that she connected with John's memories with the help of the doctor. Some of John's memories are imprinted in her mind. Images of the two of them working together flash through her mind, affirming her belief. By evening, Peter confirms to her through blood testing that the monster is indeed Marshall. Dr. Walter theorizes that he was infected with a certain artificial virus. Whoever did this must have mastered some cutting-edge genetic technology to completely alter Marshall's DNA. Even if the plane hadn't crashed, he would have been doomed due to such a transformation. Additionally, Peter found a red glass disc in the palm of his left hand. Soon after, Charlie brings in Daniel for questioning. Olivia shows him a photo of the monster, identifying it as Marshall. However, Daniel denies knowing Marshall. As he is speaking, he too starts bleeding from his nose. Seeing this, Dr. Walter urgently calls for Peter to bring sedatives. Daniel bleeding worsens and he cries out for help. Seizing the opportunity, Olivia forces him to admit that the poisoner's name is Conrad. After revealing this, he faints. The doctor brings him back to the lab and concocts an antidote. Looking at the unconscious Daniel, Olivia finds another glass disc in the palm of his hand. She takes it to Philip to inquire about its purpose and requests to view her boyfriend's body, believing that John too had one of these objects in his hand. Philip takes her to Massive Dynamic, stating that it is the largest contractor for the Department of Defense, capable of developing next-generation technology that surpasses that of the U.S. government. She then sees John's body. Nina remarks that he looks alive, but that's not the case. If the host's body is completely damaged, the disc in the palm would self-destruct. They had tried to read the disc's information using his body, blood, and DNA, but only a small amount of information was deciphered. The information revealed that John was part of a bioterrorist organization. Philip continues, saying the information mentions a scientist named Conrad who specializes in designing biological weapons for black market trading. They have received a tip that he will be conducting a significant weapons deal in Chicago soon, but the exact time and location are unknown. Olivia asks Peter to prepare the sensory deprivation tank. If John and Conrad were in cahoots, she is sure she can find the answer in John's memories. Thus, she immerses herself in the tank once again. In a daze, she arrives in front of a house. John says Conrad is a devil who can create horrifying biological weapons and sell them to the highest bidder. He points to himself standing on a rooftop in the past, saying he didn't know Conrad then, or he would have never let him slip away. That was his most important mission, and he failed. John further reveals that Marshall, Daniel, and he were all government agents, part of a secret task force under the National Security Agency. However, he couldn't prove his identity because it was a black box operation with no recorded history. Olivia doesn't believe him and asks him to reveal Conrad's trading location. John tells her to ask Daniel, as he would know more. After saying this, he disappears. Peter urges her to consider carefully. What if John is deceiving her and wants to harm her? But the assistant encourages her to trust her intuition. In the end, she decides to trust John and asks Dr. Walter to inject Daniel with the antidote to wake him up. Daniel agrees to cooperate with the FBI. Meanwhile, Philip informs the officers that other agents have apprehended several potential buyers of the bioweapons at the airport that morning. However, the suspects are refusing to cooperate. Olivia prepares to pose as a buyer to deal with Conrad's subordinates. To ensure the deal is not exposed, Daniel will relay all necessary details through an encrypted, untraceable radio implanted in advance. Charlie will assist with surveillance. At this point, the target has appeared at the entrance of the transaction hotel. Peter, concerned for Olivia's safety, insists on accompanying her. With Daniel's help, the transaction initially goes smoothly. However, the seller suddenly mentions that his boss, Conrad, wants to meet Olivia. Daniel, on the other end of the phone, is struggling. He begins to bleed profusely from his nose and lose his teeth. Dr. Walter has no choice but to inject him with a sedative. As a result, when the seller throws out another probing question, the unconscious Daniel is unable to respond, and the atmosphere becomes tense. Peter tries to create a diversion to buy time, but Conrad suddenly appears. Olivia finally sends the signal to her colleagues to move in. Just as Conrad orders his men to kill Olivia and Peter, the waiting Charlie leads other agents to burst into the room, capturing Conrad and his crew. Upon investigation, it is discovered that Conrad is also linked to 6 other bioweapon cases. Philip states that despite this, they still can't prove John's innocence. However, this no longer matters to Olivia because she knows the truth. After Daniel is injected with Conrad's antidote, his condition rapidly improves. Olivia asks Dr. Walter to let her return to the sensory deprivation tank. The doctor tells her that her consciousness has successfully driven out John's. Even if she could connect with him again, it would probably only last a few minutes, and then she will never see him again. Regardless, Olivia enters the tank once more and reunites with John. She apologizes for doubting him, but John doesn't mind. He presents her with a heavy diamond ring and places it on her finger. After a tongueless kiss, John disappears forever without traces of his smelly hormones. The 14th episode shifts to Jones murdering his own lawyer inside a German prison. After changing into his lawyer's clothes, he positions himself in a corner. A blinding flash of light later, he miraculously finds himself in Boston, United States. 2 weeks later, Olivia informs a father-son duo of doctors about Jones's jailbreak. She suspects that Jones used a device stolen by Mitchell to accomplish his teleportation. Dr. Walter explains that this device is a transport mechanism, the theory of which is based on disassembly and reassembly. Peter interprets this as a teleportation system focusing on time transmission. One morning, a newspaper vendor receives a bill. His eyes start feeling uncomfortable, and soon they are sealed shut. His nose and mouth follow suit, and he eventually suffocates to death. Olivia brings Mitchell out of prison to query him about Jones's whereabouts. Mitchell contends that finding Jones would be of no help, as he is merely a pawn. Whatever is written in the script is destined to happen and cannot be stopped. Philip summons the Fringe team to the hospital. Dr. Walter conjectures that the newspaper vendor's death was caused by a mutation that caused his body to identify and seal all of his orifices. Olivia asks Peter for assistance in finding an anonymous manuscript about the destructive technological progress. Consequently, Peter takes her to his friend's bookstore, where they successfully locate this long-lost manuscript. By this time, Agent Charlie has found Jones's location. As the head of the team applies for a search warrant, Jones surrenders himself, specifically asking to meet Olivia. However, Charlie disagrees, believing that they should not compromise with terrorists. He insists that Olivia goes to Jones's hideout to find evidence that will make him talk. During this time, Charlie tries to interrogate Jones himself, but Jones insists on talking only to Olivia and requests that she bring some items he needs when she comes to see him. Olivia and her colleagues search the warehouse, where she finds a portrait of herself on a table. One of the investigators touches some cash in a drawer and suffers the same fate as the newspaper vendor, suffocating as his mouth and nose seal shut. Despite Olivia's efforts, she cannot save him. So, Olivia has no choice but to meet Jones. He quickly turns the items she brought into a signal jammer, predicting that their conversation would be monitored. Jones admits to being behind the newspaper vendor's death and warns that more terror plots are in motion. To crack these, Olivia would need to pass a test. He instructs her to bring the key he had in his pocket when he surrendered and to fetch something with it. Suddenly, Jones exhibits signs of intense pain. He explains that it's a side effect of his disassembly and reassembly during teleportation. No one can cure it. He informs her that a white truck is currently transporting an explosive device capable of killing hundreds of people. In 16 hours, it will detonate, and those victims will die like the newspaper vendor and the investigator. Olivia insists that Jones disarms the bomb immediately, but he says only she can do it. Retrieving the item is the first step. At this point, Harris from Homeland Security calls Olivia out. She informs him about Jones's attack plan and quickly leaves the office building. Olivia retrieves the item Jones had stored and discovers it's a game box. Inside is a letter stating that the game is an assessment system. Only those with exceptional abilities can pass. She is instructed to only do the first test and come find him after completion. If she follows these instructions, no one will die. It's clear that this is a test that threatens the lives of hundreds of people. At the same time, Dr. Walter discovers that the term new recruit appearing in the game manual also appears in the anonymous manuscript. Olivia is about to start playing the game when she receives a call from Charlie. He says that the white truck carrying the bomb has her name written as the recipient. She has to stop the game and return to the interrogation room. She tells Jones she has the game and is already aware of the ZFT manifesto. Jones says that Olivia is one of the users of cortexiphen, which is why he wanted to kidnap her and confirm this through a lumbar puncture. Olivia is baffled, insisting she has never taken cortexiphen and cannot complete the test. However, Jones is adamant that she can do it. His symptoms worsen, and he faints in front of her. Consequently, she takes him to the doctor's lab for help. Dr. Walter explains that Jones's molecules are constantly disassembling and reassembling. Olivia learns that cortexiphen was an unapproved patented drug produced by Massive Dynamic. She rushes to the company where its director, Nina, reveals that the drug was invented by the company's boss, Dr. Bell, in 1981. It was meant for children to prevent the natural reduction of brain capability, but it was ineffective. The research was abandoned in 1983. After confirming that she was not in the experimental area as a child, Olivia takes her leave. Jones wakes up later. Olivia, with the game box that Peter had tampered with, pretends to pass the test. Jones sees through her act but doesn't reveal anything, instead giving her the address where the bomb device is located. The FBI quickly arrives and evacuates the building's occupants. Unexpectedly, the explosive device hidden on the 47th floor of the building is the same as the one in the game box, the same game. The blast could destroy 4 city blocks. Olivia realizes she's been played and frantically calls Jones, admitting she doesn't have the ability. but he insists she can and warns any attempt to defuse the bomb will trigger an early detonation. Olivia knows she has no other choice. She instructs the others to evacuate and bravely approaches the explosive device, staring intently at the light bulbs. Incredibly, 2 seconds before detonation, the light bulbs miraculously go out one by one. She can hardly believe it. She wants to confront Jones, but when she arrives at the hospital, his room has been blown open with a message left behind, saying she had passed. Once again, Jones has escaped. Back home, Nina calls and tells Olivia about cortexiphen and the location of the second clinical trial, the military base where she lived as a child, indicating that Olivia might indeed possess some special ability. In the evening, after reading the anonymous manuscript, Dr. Walter dusts off an old typewriter and types the word ability. The 15th episode shifts to an abandoned building which was planned for demolition. Unexpectedly, construction workers discover a deep underground space. To their astonishment, they find a pale, bald boy living in the tunnel. In the morning, Olivia learns from Charlie that the artist killer is back at work. Shortly afterwards, Philip summons the members of the Fringe team to the children's hospital. The boy's skin is unusually pale and he hasn't spoken a word since he was found. Doctors suggest the boy needs oxygen due to his labored breathing, but Dr. Walter hastily stops them, insisting that the boy has adapted to a low-oxygen environment due to being trapped for so long. Adding oxygen would only cause his lungs to fill with fluid, resulting in suffocation. The boy should be given less oxygen. Dr. Walter's method proves effective, and the boy's breathing stabilizes. He speculates that the boy survived on rats and insects in the tunnel, and his baldness is due to a deficiency in a certain mineral causing abnormal hair follicles. Olivia greets the boy kindly. Suddenly, her phone rings, startling the boy. As she hangs up and takes notes on a piece of paper, the boy grabs her arm and writes the name, but the letters are upside down. Meanwhile, in a laundromat, a man in a wheelchair strikes up a conversation with a tattooed girl. As she helps him move his things, he suddenly stands and injects her with a drug. He then kills her in his car. In the evening, Olivia and Agent Charlie rush to the crime scene. The police determine that the tattooed girl was killed by an artist killer who modifies his victims post-mortem and then reveals them to the public. Olivia is shocked when she hears the victim's name, which is exactly the same as the name written down by the boy. Back at the office, Charlie briefs everyone on the case. The perpetrator, nicknamed the Artist Killer, first began committing his crimes 3 years ago. Over 2 years, he murdered 4 women in the Jamaica Plain area before laying low. His modus operandi involves abduction and sedation, killing his victims and then modifying their appearances with surgical tools and chemicals, according to his own vision. He also sends a fax to announce his crimes before he commits them. Olivia says she showed the boy's photo to the friends and family of the tattooed girl, but nobody recognized him. At this moment, the office receives another fax from the artist killer. Later, Olivia brings rainbow candies to visit the boy in the hospital. The boy sweetly puts a red candy into her mouth. Just as she's about to ask him to write down his name, a man claiming to be a social worker arrives at the room. He calls her outside the room and informs her that he will be transferring the boy to another aid organization the next day. The boy seems to understand and becomes terrified, his blood pressure and heart rate rising. Olivia returns to his side to calm him down. The man leaves the room and makes a phone call saying he had found another one. At this moment, the boy writes down a street name. Olivia and Charlie rush to the location. At this moment, the artist killer is in the middle of his crime. When he hears a noise, he covers the victim's mouth, and Olivia doesn't discover anything. But when she returns home, she receives news about a second victim. Charlie says they found blood in the victim's fingernails and are conducting further analysis. After they left the address the boy provided, a neighbor discovered the victim's dog tied to a fence and whimpering. Olivia realizes that she and Charlie were at the scene, and the information the boy gave them was correct. She visits Dr. Walter, asking for help to understand the boy's thoughts and how he knew about the situation. The doctor says that living underground for many years, the boy has heightened sensitivities to sound and light, and possibly to human emotions as well. This is a form of primitive neural connection that lets him sense other people's feelings and intentions. The doctor comes up with a way to read the boy's thoughts, and so Olivia rushes to the hospital. After getting the boy's consent, she brings him back to the lab. Dr. Walter puts on a record and, playfully brandishing the neural stimulator, gets the boy laughing, his mood visibly relaxing. However, he then tightly grips Olivia's hand. He has recognized the social worker. It turns out the social worker is actually from the CIA. He accuses Olivia of kidnapping the boy. Just then, the assistant announces that they have received another fax from the artist killer. Philip asks the CIA agent to give them 1 day to solve the case, after which they will return the boy. Olivia receives the forensic report. Unexpectedly, the blood found under the victim's fingernails turns out to be from a cow and is mixed with some plastic polymers. Peter suddenly recalls that a few years ago, he worked as a cleaner in a meat processing factory. Before the products were sent for sale, they would be wrapped in plastic. This would explain the presence of cow's blood and plastic. Olivia visits several meat processing factories. At the 4th factory, the owner mentions that a man had bought some packaging materials from him the previous day. Meanwhile, Dr. Walter has adjusted the equipment and is ready to listen to the thoughts in the boy's brain. However, the boy starts to shiver. Just then, Olivia calls, saying that she has obtained a sketch of the suspect from the meat processing factory. When the doctor learns that the factory is a cold storage processing factory, he finally understands why the boy feels cold. He says it's because the boy wants to help Olivia and has sensed the murderer's presence at the meat processing factory. Olivia walks over to the boy holding his hand and tells him that the killer is going to strike again unless she can stop him. She asks if the boy knows who the murderer is. At this moment, she feels the boy is angry with her. The assistant suggests that he might not want to leave because after helping catch the killer, he will be handed over. Realizing this, Olivia sincerely apologizes to the boy. He forgives her and writes down an address. Olivia and her colleague manage to capture the artist killer at that location and find a living victim in the killer's car. Afterwards, Olivia seeks help from Philip, lying that the boy has suddenly disappeared. Instead of handing him over to the CIA agent, she asks a kind-hearted female doctor to take him home and take care of him. The 16th episode begins with a group of students breaking into an animal lab and setting free the small creatures inside. The person in charge of the lab, upon receiving an alarm notification on his phone, rushed back, but was too late. A young man named Jonathan had already opened the iron door. Suddenly, a monstrous creature attacked both the person in charge and Jonathan. The other 3, frightened, quickly fled the lab and drove away. However, the monster still caught up with them, leading to the young people's untimely demise. The next morning, the Fringe team arrived at the car accident scene. There were 3 bodies inside the car. Dr. Walter deduced that the creature that attacked the victims must have had sharp claws, similar to those of a bear or a large feline with a V-shaped toe spread. But this kind of camel toe spread was too wide for a bear or a feline, and the structure was closer to an eagle's claw, but much larger. Furthermore, there were 4 cups of drink in the car, but only 3 bodies were found. Philip reported that they had conducted an extensive search in the forest, but found no additional bodies. At this point, Peter mentioned that the food inside the car was from a fast food restaurant near MIT called Genius Fast Food. Afterwards, Olivia found some clues from the student database. She visited the residence of one of the victims, Chris, and learned from his roommate that Chris was a radical animal rights activist. He had joined an organization and would rescue any creature with a beak or claws. Meanwhile, Dr. Walter made a new discovery. The creature that killed the victims had incredibly sharp claws and large, venomous fangs akin to those of a poisonous snake. Integrating this information with Olivia's clues, Peter hypothesized that the students had broken into the animal lab and released the animals. This also explained why burglary tools were found in their car and their concealed identities. At this point, Dr. Walter pulled a spine from the back of a body. He seemed to have thought of something and pulled out old data. Soon there was news that a woman claimed to have seen the monster on Highway 30. Charlie was the first to arrive and found a deceased young man from the Animal Association. Then, the monster suddenly appeared, attacked Charlie, and quickly fled. Olivia and the doctor hurried to the scene soon after. Luckily, Charlie was not seriously injured. Dr. Walter speculated that they were dealing with a transgenic species, a creature created by merging genes from multiple species. In a way, it could be considered the king of beasts. At this point, the assistant found a lab near the car accident scene that housed animals. Olivia rushed to the lab named Swift Research. The person in charge, Swift, claimed that they didn't conduct any genetic modification experiments and declined her request to visit. Back in their own lab, Dr. Walter pulled out an illustration from years ago where he had attempted to create a creature. However, his experiment had failed then, and there was no Swift among those who had participated in the experiment with him. Suddenly, the assistant noticed movement in the body. When she unzipped the body bag, the corpse was covered in nauseating bugs. The doctor identified these as the monster's larvae. Then, the chest of the corpse burst open, releasing thousands of larvae. It was incredibly disgusting. Dr. Walter hypothesized that the spine that had penetrated the body must have been carrying the larvae eggs, spreading them during its sting. Olivia immediately thought of Charlie. She brought him back to the lab. Sure enough, using ultrasound, the doctor found larvae in Charlie's abdomen. These larvae had begun to spread within his body. The doctor tried to poison the larvae, but quickly found that although the poison could kill the larvae, it also toxified Charlie's blood. Charlie's blood pressure began to drop, and his kidney function deteriorated. The larvae survive by absorbing nutrients from their host, and they must kill the host in order to grow. Dr. Walter had a daring theory. He believed that if they mixed Charlie's blood with the blood of the monster's mother and transfused it back into Charlie, the larvae might recognize Charlie as one of them and stop absorbing nutrients, effectively starving to death. After analyzing the monster's sightings, Olivia believed it was active underground. The doctor agreed because the monster carried the genes of a tiger, so it preferred dark environments. The genes of a python urged it to seek water. Its appearance on the surface was likely in search of food or a mate. At this time, Olivia received news that the monster had been spotted near a park. Simultaneously, Chris's roommate called to say that Jonathan hadn't been to class for a few days. He and Chris were both animal rights activists, and Jonathan's family name was Swift. Olivia returned to Swift's research lab. Under her persistent questioning, Swift finally admitted that the monster did indeed originate from his lab. His son and his geneticist partner had been killed. He also divulged the species involved in the fusion: a bearded dragon, a potter wasp, and a vampire bat. Dr. Walter suddenly understood. Their immune systems made them excellent materials for special integration, allowing this creature to mature without rejecting the various parts of their integration. He mentioned that bats are a very maternal species and are protective of their offspring. They could use its larvae to bait it. So the doctor secretly took some poison and set off with Olivia and Peter. According to the map, they arrived at the sewer and placed a box full of larvae at a cross junction. However, when the other two were unprepared, Dr. Walter locked himself behind an iron door, using himself as bait. He believed that the appearance of the monster was his fault, and he couldn't let others get hurt because of it. Peter and Olivia tried desperately to dissuade him from his foolish act, but in front of them, he swallowed the poison he had brought with him. He said that if the monster ate him, it would be poisoned too. Then they could extract its blood to save Charlie. Finally, he instructed that if he didn't die, there was an antidote in the lab that his son should take within an hour. In a state of frantic worry, Peter grumbled about his father's irresponsibility while desperately trying to pry open the door to save him. Just then, the monster appeared. Olivia and Peter arrived just in time. As the monster lunged at them, Dr. Walter shot the massive creature, which soon fell and lay motionless. Afterward, they returned to the lab and mixed the monster's blood with Charlie's to create an antidote. When they transfused it into Charlie, the larvae gradually died off. Charlie was saved. The 17th episode begins with a mother humming a tune while strolling into the subway with her baby. As the subway was about to arrive, the baby's balloon flew away. The mother reached out to catch it, but just then, Olivia surprisingly appeared and pushed her onto the tracks. Olivia woke up from her dream, completely alert. Even more bizarre was that the morning news reported a suicide at the subway station the previous night. Olivia was stunned when she saw the victim's photo. It was exactly like in her dream. She went to the lab and told everyone about this bewildering event. She said she could even smell the scent of the station and see the baby staring at her. Furthermore, she had seen the deceased before the news broadcast, so this was definitely not just a dream. Afterwards, Olivia and Peter went to the station to investigate. Before arriving at the scene, she said there was a red balloon floating to the ceiling at the scene. Indeed, Peter found the red balloon at the crime scene. They met the deceased's husband, who tearfully held their daughter and said that his wife was happy and would never take her life. Subsequently, Olivia and Peter watched the surveillance footage from the time and made a copy. Back at the lab, Olivia played the footage, but she was not in it. This was different from her dream. Dr. Walter said dreams are not entirely real. Perhaps it was her will that manipulated the woman to jump. However, Olivia had no motive. She didn't even know the deceased. In the evening, Olivia arrived at a restaurant. A couple who were chatting and laughing suddenly turned sour. The wife picked up a sharp knife and questioned her husband about an affair. With a bewildered look on his face, the husband was stabbed in the abdomen by the wife, who was suddenly pushed from behind by Olivia. Olivia woke up again from the dream. She frantically called Charlie, reporting a murder. Olivia and Peter then went to the hospital. The wife, filled with guilt, said her husband had always been faithful to her. She didn't understand why she suddenly felt the night before that her husband was going to leave her. She was scared, and in her anger, she killed her husband. However, Olivia told her that she didn't do it. They went to the restaurant where the murder happened the previous night. Olivia found the shattered pieces of a glass she had broken in her dream on the floor. She asked the manager if she had been sitting there, to which he replied nervously that it had been a blonde young man with a scar on his face. Olivia identified the young man with the scar in the subway suicide case video. Dr. Walter understood that the person she saw in her dream was not her, but that young man. He was the one who had hurt people. They found information about a man named Nick in the database. Olivia and Peter went to the address listed in the data, an old mental hospital, to investigate. The doctor said that Nick had been living here for 5 years already. He had a comprehensive military insurance. 4 months ago, a lawyer came with documents stating that Nick had inherited a substantial fortune. Soon after, Nick was discharged from the hospital. Nick's emotions were highly contagious. He had suicidal tendencies but posed no threat to others. He mentioned that he was recruited by the military in his childhood to take part in highly confidential experiments. He spoke of wars against enemies from parallel universes, which coincided with the ZFT manifesto. Olivia suspected that Nick had taken cortexiphen, so she immediately sought out Dr. Walter. Upon learning that cortexiphen works on the sensory level, Olivia speculated that Nick could influence others through his emotions. If he had suicidal tendencies, then his emotions on the platform could have influenced the mother. When he was in the restaurant and saw the sweet couple, it may have touched on his fear of abandonment, thereby influencing the wife to kill her husband. Peter asked why Olivia was able to dream about Nick. The doctor explained that when they used children for experiments before, they would split them into 2 groups. This kind of division could reduce children's sense of isolation from fear, sometimes creating a close connection, which cortexiphen would greatly amplify. Upon hearing this, Olivia recoiled in fear because she concluded that she had taken cortexiphen before. Fortunately, the doctor also knew how to find Nick. To enhance Olivia's sensitivity to Nick, he performed deep hypnosis on her. She said that Nick went to a club where his emotions influenced a dancer. They left the club together and rented a room. However, afterwards, he felt guilt and shame, despised himself, and wished he were dead. His emotions then passed on to the dancer, who smashed a glass and slit her throat. Dr. Walter explained it was a dream, and Nick's ability to transmit his negative emotions to others was his senses killing people. After that, Olivia woke up, now knowing where Nick lived. In the early morning, after taking his medication, Nick armed himself with a handgun and left his home. Olivia arrived a step too late, but discovered the information Nick had collected on the wall. At this point, Charlie received a message. Under Nick's influence, several bystanders had joined him in entering a large building. Olivia and her group quickly drove to the scene. Dr. Walter speculated that Nick might have become a contagious source of action. Fortunately, Olivia, having taken cortexiphen, was immune to Nick's ability and wouldn't be affected by him. When they arrived, the rooftop was already filled with people. Nick was delighted to see Olivia, exclaiming that she was finally here, and she was always so strong when they were kids. Whenever he was scared, she was always there to comfort him. However, Olivia couldn't recall any of this. Nick shared that he had been waiting for the day to be summoned, but it never came until the man with glasses came to the hospital and woke him up. He regretfully admitted that he should not have listened to the man and didn't want to hurt anyone anymore. He implored Olivia to kill him. Just as she was about to persuade him otherwise, Nick screamed in a chicken voice, causing a woman to leap off the building. He explained that if he jumped, the others would follow him, and again begged Olivia to end his shitty life. After hesitating for a moment, Olivia shot him in the leg. Nick fell to the ground, and the others collapsed and regained consciousness. After the incident, Philip revealed that the lawyer's identity had been falsified. He had reapplied to the massive Dynamic Corporation for information on cortexiphen, but director Nina revealed that the volunteer list had been wiped clean. Looking at Nick, who was in an indefinite coma due to the drug, Olivia was filled with emotions. That night, Charlie secretly brought the information he had collected from Nick's home to Olivia. Meanwhile, Dr. Walter found an old video of Olivia participating in the experiment. The 18th episode shifts to a man sneaking out behind his girlfriend's back to pick up girls at a nightclub. He brought one home for a night of fun, but to his surprise, the girl suddenly twisted and snapped his neck with a swift motion of her hand. She left energetically after having her fill. The next day, the police received a report from the man's girlfriend. There were no signs of forced entry into the home of the deceased, Bob. Due to the manner of the victim's death, similar to 2 previous incidents at the docks, the case was handed over to the FBI due to the lack of leads. Dr. Walter found human bite marks on Bob's back, but the force used was much stronger than that of a normal person. At the same time, Olivia found out that Bob's Audi car had also gone missing, suspecting that the killer had driven it away. Subsequently, the doctor had the body transported back to the lab. To his astonishment, he discovered that the spinal fluid of the victims in both cases was fully drained. Furthermore, in the autopsy reports provided by the assistant, he found traces of syphilis pathogens on the victims' necks and backs, likely from the killer's saliva. What's more bizarre is that this type of syphilis pathogen had been extinct for decades. Therefore, Olivia sought help at the Disease Control Center. The staff mentioned that a sample of this syphilis pathogen was sent to a pharmaceutical company 4 weeks ago. Over the past few years, this company had ordered numerous virus samples. The company is located in a residential area. Olivia considered the matter of great importance and asked the staff to report with her to their superiors. She mentioned that the company had also requested RUD-390, a compound used to create biological weapons. It was one of the components of the rapid skin growth formula that killed an agent previously. Perhaps ZFT is the mastermind behind these murders. Philip immediately ordered a siege on the company. The FBI broke in and brought Boone, who was dissecting animal spines, to the interrogation room. Boone said he knew a lot of information they wanted to know and would share it, but first, they needed to help him find his wife. He learned that ZFT was using his work for evil and wanted to quit, but they threatened his wife's life and forced him to continue experimenting. Boone's wife, Valerie, is a nurse. Olivia confirmed from her workplace that Valerie hadn't shown up for work in 3 weeks. She believes this is a good opportunity to catch the mastermind behind ZFT. The address Boone provided for the search was a Chinese restaurant in Chinatown, which was suspicious. Its daily power consumption was enormous, which likely indicated it was a lab. Sure enough, a hidden lab was found in the restaurant, but Boone's wife was not there. At this point, Boone called Olivia, asking her to bring back the virus samples from the freezer. He confessed that ZFT didn't kidnap his wife, but they injected her with this virus to make her kill people. He urgently needed the virus samples to create an antidote. At this point, his wife, the vampire Valerie, found a new target outside the nightclub. The young man was very considerate towards her. Valerie was deeply moved, yet she tearfully killed the young man. Olivia returned to the interrogation room and played a video found at Boone's house of him and his father. 3 weeks ago, Boone was a healthy man who could run and jump, but not long after, he became crippled. It's revealed that his wife Valerie's infectious disease had destroyed her own spinal fluid, so Boone fed her his spinal fluid. But the more he gave, the more she craved, until he could no longer give. He once tried to synthesize an antidote, but it was unsuccessful. The purpose of ZFT making him create this drug, like the previous skin growth toxin, was just to show off to other scientists. Now the only way is to create an antidote. Fortunately, he has now regained the virus sample and has the hope to create an antidote. With the consent of her supervisor, Olivia brought Boone to Dr. Walter's lab and asked the doctor to assist Boone in developing an antidote. At this time, the missing car of the deceased Bob was found. Near where the car was discovered, Peter and Olivia found another man who had been drained of spinal fluid. After the two bodies were returned to the lab, the assistant smelled a strong alcohol scent on the bodies, concluding that the deceased must have drunk alcohol before death. From the special marks on the backs of the two bodies' hands, it was determined that they were entry marks from a nightclub. But at this moment, the test mice for the antidote died, and Boone needed more time to develop the antidote. He pleaded with Olivia to bring his wife back alive, assuring he could cure her. Boone realized the problem and asked Dr. Walter to extract his spinal fluid and add it to the antidote. The doctor disagreed, as Boone had already lost too much spinal fluid, and doing so would cause a brain hemorrhage, which would be too dangerous. But Boone was certain that he had been careful to monitor, and it was still safe to extract another 25 milliliters. Seeing that he was determined, the doctor agreed. At this moment, Olivia and others arrived at the nightclub. Peter used a thermal imager to find Valerie, and Charlie stunned her with a tranquilizer gun. Suddenly, the assistant found that Boone had started to convulse. The doctor understood that Boone, in order to save his wife, tricked him into extracting too much spinal fluid. By evening, Olivia and Peter brought Valerie back to the lab. Dr. Walter injected the antidote containing Boone's spinal fluid into the back of Valerie's neck. Upon seeing this, Boone, with his last breath, thanked Olivia. Immediately afterward, Valerie began to scream and convulse, then fell into a coma. The doctor pulled open her eyelids and saw her strange blue eyeballs slowly returning to normal. He knew the antidote was working, but Boone had closed his eyes. He peacefully passed away. Everyone present felt sorrowful for Boone's departure. Afterward, Dr. Walter took out a videotape, which was also entrusted to Olivia by Boone before his death. In the video, Boone said he had made many mistakes in his life, and if possible, he hoped Olivia could help correct some of them. That night, Olivia met with Philip in a coffee shop. She said what Boone had left behind did not mention Jones, but it did mention a name they were both familiar with. This person sponsored ZFT, and he was the chairman of the massive dynamic, Dr. Bell. The 19th episode begins with a young woman anxiously getting on a bus. As soon as she settled into her seat, the window beside her fogged up with condensation, and the newspaper of the passenger in front of her suddenly ignited. Sensing that something was amiss, she asked the driver to stop and got off the bus. She gasped for air, asking passers-by for help. Her face reddened dramatically, and she suddenly burst into flames, the blaze reaching sky high. In recent days, Dr. Walter has been studying the ZFT manifesto. He discovered that it was written by Dr. Bell, the boss of Massive Dynamic, but he refuses to believe that Bell would carry out such horrifying acts. Moreover, he noticed that the manifesto was incomplete. He suspected that someone removed the sections related to moral norms to satisfy their own evil intentions. The original draft might still be in the lab. The Fringe team quickly arrived at the scene. They didn't find any accelerants or incendiary devices, and Dr. Walter was also initially clueless. They transported the body back to the lab for further analysis. However, Olivia saw 2 bodies at the scene, wondering whether it was just her hallucination. She kept quiet about it. Later, when she reported to her superior Philip, she noticed that his desk had been moved. He also mentioned 2 bodies and showed her photographs. Confused, she saw Philip walk into the office. Was she experiencing another hallucination? As they were talking, an agent stormed into the office, saying that Massive Dynamic was the Department of Defense's largest contractor, and they must immediately stop investigating them. Philip outwardly agreed, but covertly asked Olivia to intensify her efforts to gather more evidence. The assistant noticed that the victim had signs of excessive flossing on her teeth. She tried searching in the database and surprisingly found a matching victim named Susan. Soon, Olivia and Charlie arrived at Susan's house to investigate. A check for $30,000 and a bathroom damaged by fire caught their attention. Dr. Walter then overturned his previous hypothesis about spontaneous combustion. He thought of pyrolysis, a process that could activate objects at a molecular level. For example, treating each grain in a cereal as a molecule. When these molecules vibrate rapidly, they generate heat until the energy must be released. He guessed that pyrolysis was a new ability Susan had acquired, which needed training. If she didn't control the heat source produced outside her body well, the energy would turn inward. Susan had become a powder keg because she failed to control this. Emotional stress or any form of high anxiety could ignite her. At that moment, Charlie called. He found out that the check was sent from a law firm. However, by the time he and Olivia arrived, the place was deserted. But they heard Susan's message on the phone. As Olivia stepped out of the building, she was met with a wave of gloom. A fire truck sped past, and a building in the distance was billowing black smoke. The government was evacuating citizens to emergency shelters. The scene was desolate. As she was wondering, Charlie called out to her. Suddenly, everything returned to normal. Dr. Walter explained that Olivia was experiencing an extended hallucination memory. Most people believe that life progresses linearly, but every choice we make leads to a new reality. Hallucination memory is a glimpse of another life. Our feeling of déjà vu is because we have indeed been there in another reality. But Olivia suspected that it was caused by the cortexiphen she took as a child. At this time, the assistant discovered a website called Galactic Truth, which posted a photo of another victim who died in the same manner as Susan. Olivia and Peter rushed to visit the owner of the website, who said that 3 weeks ago, an American graduate student was attacked while on vacation in Hungary. But he believed it had something to do with Dr. Bell of Massive Dynamic. He accused Bell of creating super soldiers to resist the Lumilans, who were trying to alter the course of the timeline. Back in the office, Olivia experienced another hallucination. The ringing phone on the desk suddenly turned red, and her colleagues were all busy with their work. Charlie said that half of Boston was under martial law and quarantined. The 2 charred bodies were twins. While she was confused, everything returned to reality. Olivia quickly asked her colleagues to search the database, and indeed found that Susan had a twin sister named Nancy, who disappeared 11 years ago. However, someone had gotten to her first, and Nancy had just been kidnapped. Peter noticed that the windows in Nancy's house had been melted, so he cut out a piece of the glass and placed it on his homemade device. Peter had been trying to help his dad digitize his water-damaged records, so he invented this device. Using an electron microscope, he captured high-resolution digital images from the grooves on the surface of the record, which were then translated into audible audio signals by a computer. Since stress triggered the pyrolysis ability in the sisters, Peter hypothesized that all the sounds in the room when Nancy was kidnapped would leave microscopic imprints on the melted glass, just like the grooves on a record. The glass indeed recorded the sounds at the scene. Olivia felt that the male voice in the recording was familiar. She dialed the number using her phone with tone dialing capability and discovered that the other party was none other than Harris from Homeland Security. Olivia and Charlie followed Harris to a warehouse. On the wall of a room, they found photos of several terrorist incidents and pictures of themselves. After some fighting, Olivia found Nancy, who had been tied up in the northwest corner. Harris immediately locked her and Nancy in the room. At this point, Nancy's pyrolysis ability had been activated. If Nancy couldn't control her emotions, both she and Olivia would be burned to a crisp. Olivia encouraged Nancy to try to focus her mind. Nancy stared at Harris, who soon turned red and caught on fire. It was poetic justice. Nancy and Olivia were saved as well. In the evening, Olivia asked Dr. Walter what exactly Belle had done to her. Choking up, he said they didn't intend to harm anyone, they just wanted to make her more capable. He had a premonition of an impending horror, but he couldn't remember what it was exactly. Meanwhile, director Nina from Massive Dynamic found Philip and showed him photos of the observer appearing frequently within the last 24 hours. She knew something was about to happen. The night came, and Dr. Walter finally found the missing part of the ZFT manifesto. He was overjoyed. Just then, the observer suddenly visited and took the doctor away from his lab. Nina also got shot by an unknown person when she returned to her apartment. The 20th episode shifts to Nina being rushed to the hospital. The FBI accessed the surveillance footage from her apartment and found that the group of assailants had killed the doorman and replaced him. They were waiting for the opportune moment to ambush Nina as the elevator door opened. Olivia used voice recognition software and confirmed that the bandaged criminal was indeed Jones. Soon, Nina woke up from her pig-like sleep and asked to see Olivia. She said that 15 years ago, Jones had worked for Massive Dynamic Company, but was later fired. He always believed he was special, but was underappreciated. Nina suspected Jones had intentionally caused several terrorist incidents to prove himself to the company's boss, Dr. Bell. After his jailbreak, he had contacted the office more than once, asking to meet with Bell. Nina hoped the authorities could stop Jones to ensure Bell's safety, promising to arrange a meeting between Olivia and Bell. Nina then revealed that Jones had stolen Bell's super energy battery hidden in her prosthetic arm. Meanwhile, Jones had set up a machine and put the super energy battery into it, but failed. The result was a truck colliding with a car. In the early morning, Peter came to the lab and found his father missing. He began to search. By this time, the observer had taken Dr. Walter to the beach, handed him a coin, and said that this was very similar to what he was thinking of, but it came from somewhere else. Pointing to a house in the distance, he told the doctor they were short on time and he must try hard to remember what he was looking for. He then left the beach. At this point, Philip brought Nina to the lab. After learning about Dr. Walter's disappearance, Nina applied for a level 1 search warrant to find him. Meanwhile, Olivia and Charlie came to the truck accident scene. Among the witnesses, a man with a bandaged face used a black box that emitted a loud noise like a scanner. Then a window appeared, and after a flash of white light, the truck materialized out of thin air. The report came quickly. The driver of the truck died on the spot, but the fingerprints didn't match the driver's. The truck wasn't registered, and there were no manufacturing or part numbers. This implied that the truck had never been produced, which was baffling. At this moment, Nina received a photo of Dr. Walter taken 3 hours ago at Grafton Station. Peter realized his father might have gone to their seaside villa and requested to personally bring him back. As expected, the doctor was there, agitated and distressed because he had no idea what he was looking for. Peter comforted his father by reminiscing about their childhood memories at the villa. This sparked the doctor's memory, and he remembered what he was looking for. Olivia showed the photos of the truck accident scene to Philip and Nina. After learning that Dr. Bell wasn't in this world, Olivia seemed to understand. It felt familiar, like a sudden perception of another world. Some people can not only see another world, but also travel through it. The reason they couldn't find any information on the truck is because it came from another world. Nina added that this was why Jones took the super battery. He wanted to cross over to where Bell was. At this point, 3 FBI agents received calls simultaneously. Immediately afterward, Olivia and Charlie arrived at the crime scene. A boy said he had been playing soccer with his friends. When his friend chased the ball and collided with a sudden flash of light, he collapsed. It seemed like Jones was trying to open a gateway to another world. But what did this place have in common with New York? Olivia asked her colleagues to help her find all the cases of strange incidents, map their locations, and connect these points. This led them to Providence Park. Nina explained that Dr. Bell believed there were weak points in our world. In these special areas, the boundary between the two worlds was very thin and could be crossed directly. Jones was looking for such a weak point. Allegedly, if you target the right spot and release the appropriate energy, you can achieve this crossing. At this moment, Dr. Walter found what he was looking for. He told his son that years ago, he and Bell glimpsed another world by taking psychedelic substances. It's just like the world they live in, only slightly different, made up of their alternate selves. Bell also confirmed that children are naturally able to see this other world. He speculated that if nurtured properly, these abilities could be improved and amplified, eventually allowing one to cross over from here to the other world. But in crossing over, things from that side could also come through, which could be very dangerous. Therefore, he invented a plug, more like a patch, which could be used to close the entrance in a crisis. Conveniently, he knew that the entrance to the other world was at Reedon Lake, so father and son quickly drove there. Just as they parked the car, Olivia and her party burst in. It turned out that they had all come to Reedon Lake for the same purpose. At this moment, a dazzling light flashed not far away. Everyone rushed over to find Jones and his assistant working hard to adjust their machine. Olivia, under Charlie's cover, approached Jones and shouted at him to stop. But Jones didn't stop until Olivia fired 2 shots at him. Jones then turned around to reveal his terrifying false eye. It turned out that the deadly instant teleportation had made him very special. Bullets couldn't kill him. Jones continued to walk towards the portal, but at the last moment, Peter twisted the knob on the plug. Instantly, the bright light vanished, and Jones was blocked from returning and split in half. The next day, Philip said that the higher-ups had ordered the investigation into Bell to be halted. After leaving a note for Peter, Dr. Walter took the coin and placed it on the gravestone bearing his son Peter's name. In the afternoon, Olivia received an invitation from Nina. The next day, as agreed, she drove alone to the hotel on Broadway in Manhattan. She waited until all the guests had left, but there was no sign of Nina. Just as she was about to leave in the elevator, a flash of white light passed, and she seemed to enter an interlaced space. When the elevator doors opened, someone welcomed her into an office. There, she met the legendary Dr. Bell. With that, the first season of this drama concludes. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.